Hello, and a very warm welcome to our second Ocean Decade Laboratory, a predicted ocean, hosted by the German Federal Ministry of Education and Research, in partnership with the Intergovernmental Oceanographic Commission of UNESCO. My name is Monica Jones. I'm a journalist and TV anchor, and it is my great pleasure to guide you through the program. Before we get to that, let me just briefly recap what the Ocean Decade actually is all about. As you know, the ocean has an enormous impact on our planet, be it food resources, climate, environment, you name it. Unfortunately, we humans have the habit to not always appreciate what's good for us, and sadly, the ocean has been bearing the brunt for far too long. Its health is in serious decline. And that is why the United Nations General Assembly proclaimed 2021 to 2031 as the United Nations Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development, in short, the Ocean Decade. And the aim is to bring scientists and stakeholders together to help restore our planet's largest ecosystem, namely the ocean, and prepare the path for a sustainable development. Now, the first International Ocean Decade Conference was kicked off as a high-level event in June this year, and it is now followed by a total of 7 Ocean Decade Laboratories. The first one took place in July, focusing on the decade outcome and engaging and inspiring ocean. And now it's time for the second laboratory, a predicted ocean. And over the next 4 hours, you'll hear a lot about what a predicted ocean actually means, what it is all about. Before we get to that, let me briefly familiarize you with the key functions of the conference online platform, so you can engage in this laboratory too. Now, first of all, you need to be in the live stream. And given that you just have seen and still hear me, means you're there. That's a good thing. You can choose the language in which you want to follow our event, namely English, French, or Spanish, or English with subtitles. Now, right next to the live stream here, this white box, you find the chat, and here you can engage in our panel discussions by submitting your comments and questions to the panelists. To get a good overview of our agenda, just scroll down below the live stream, and there you find information about all the sessions for each day on the main stage, that's right here, and the satellite activities. And you can also get information on all the speakers. And of course, we will bring the results of both today's core event and the satellite activities, you'll hear more about that, together in Friday's wrap-up session. And during the core event and the wrap-up, you can also reach out to our live help desk here, where you can get in touch with our team in case you run into technical or any other problems. Now let's turn to the left column, where you can see several other functions. Among them, the satellite activities. There are 31 in total, taking place today, tomorrow, and on Friday, all over the globe in different time zones. Below it, you find the Ocean Library, where you find tons of material, photos, documents, videos, which you can browse through, download, and share with others, as long as you credit the author. And finally, the most frequently asked questions and answers can be found in the FAQ section, which is also in the Ocean Library. Now, if you're watching us on YouTube, which is also possible, sadly you cannot interact, but you can change that, because you can still register on our website. That's oceandecade-conference.com. And if you're on Twitter and you want to share content of this laboratory, then we would very much appreciate if you'd used the hashtag #OceanDecade. Well, I think that's the most important technical information I can give you at this moment, and we can get right down to business. A predicted ocean. What is that? What does it mean? What are we trying to achieve by that? Well, I'm not going to tell you that, because this laboratory is chaired, if you like, by 2 co-hosts, 2 co-chairs, one of whom is here with me in the studio. His name is Detlef Stammer, Professor and Director of the Center for Earth System Research and Sustainability at the University of Hamburg. Good evening to you. And of course, I can tell you much more about him. For example, that he's the chair of the WCRP Joint Scientific Committee. Previously, he co-chaired the scientific steering group of the WCRP's Climate and Ocean Variability Sustainability, Predictability and Change Core Project, and the WCRP Grant Challenge on Regional Sea Level Change and Coastal Impacts. There's much more to read about him online in the biographies, but it's very good to have you with us, Detlef.
Thank you, and hello.
And I would also like to welcome at this point the other co-chair. He's over in Washington, D.C., and it's still daylight there, if I'm not mistaken, and there he is already. Craig McLean, Acting Chief Scientist, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. So good day to you, Craig. And let me
Thank you, Monica.
Just briefly also tell our participants and viewers a little bit more about you. In your role at Oceanic and Atmospheric Research, you're responsible for overseeing, directing, and implementing NOAA's research enterprise, including a network of research laboratories and the execution of NOAA programs, such as the Climate Program, National Sea Grant, and Ocean Exploration. And that's just just a tiny fraction of everything else you're doing. Again, everything can be read online on our website. So I don't want to take more of your time now because there's a lot to discuss. Craig and Detlef, over to you. And of course, with that question, Detlef, what is a predicted ocean?
Well, thank you very much, Monica, and a very warm welcome also from Craig's and my side to this laboratory of the UN Decade Outcome, the Predicted Ocean. Before we actually get into the detail of this laboratory and its elements, we really would like to discuss this question of the predicted ocean. What is it? Now, it comes back to the fact that the ocean has a very strong impact on the climate system of the Earth and the weather. With its vast capacity of water in the ocean, everybody knows this, there's a lot of water in the ocean, but in fact it really leads to the fact that the ocean stores a lot of heat, it stores a lot of carbon, it stores a lot of nutrients. Understanding the physical part and the geochemical part of the ocean today and how it's actually changing in the future is really fundamental to adaptation and to develop strategies for environmental and climate change, but also as well to enable long-term decisions for ecosystems and economic benefits. So in a nutshell, the predicted ocean can be really compared to weather forecasts, but we are now dealing with the entire ocean. The ocean in its entirety, this means it's not just the physical part, it is the ecosystems, it is the biogeochemistry, like the carbon uptake of the ocean, but it's also the health of the ocean, the cleanness of the ocean, the extremes, in that sense, the security of the ocean. And so dealing with this on the timescales that we are typically have to concern with, dealing from daily timescales to seasonal timescales to decadal timescale or climate timescale is really what the predicted ocean is about. And covering all these aspects, but also including weather and seasonal forecasts, that means we are not just dealing with the ocean alone, we really have to deal with a coupled system, the Earth system in its entirety. So with this, over to Craig.
Detlef, thank you. And Monica, thank you very much for your warm welcome. I'm delighted to be here, and I want to thank Detlef for the partnership that has gone on into putting this together, and I'm just humbled to be his co-chair in putting this forward. I'm also honored to see the number of people and the caliber of people that we have that will be participating in this core event over the next 4 hours. But the predicted ocean is something that's remarkably important to all of us. Many people don't realize the importance of oceanography, ocean measurements, and ocean science in their daily lives. But I would say that there's not a person on Earth that's not touched by the healthy state of the ocean or the changes that are taking place in the ocean. Our ability to predict these changes, to measure these accurately, model them, and then offer out-year predictions is what society needs to depend upon, whether you're a farmer, whether you're a fisherman, a coastal resident, or an inland resident. Everyone is touched by this. It's something I'm fond of reminding people. If you like your 7 to 10 day weather forecast, thank an oceanographer. Those measurements are coming from the ocean. But a predicted ocean is something quite complex. It provides society with an understanding and advance notice in the ability to respond to changing ocean conditions. And these conditions impact our lives, our economies, our communities, our society, our wellness. This isn't just a question of scientific understanding, it's scientific understanding that's then applied to civil society. So the key elements that we have in a changing ocean include, as Detlef mentioned, the physical, the chemical, the biological components, and we measure those with ships, with satellites, buoys, gliders, drifters. Each of these is equipped with highly sensitive sensors that are calibrated and deliver quality information. Scientists then analyze, model, and then forecast what the future state would be and allow us to predict this ocean. That gives us an accurate weather forecast. That gives us an accurate fisheries productivity. It gives us an accurate state of the climate. As we know, as we're in the climate crisis, this is more and more important to us on a daily basis. So this knowledge is required from the coasts to the deepest parts of the ocean and from pole to pole. It is all over the world, all over the earth. That's why we have this 48-hour event that's reaching every time zone in the world, allowing everyone to participate either live or to be watching this later in a recorded session. But all of this is important scientifically and is clearly important societally, where the health, the prosperity, and the wellness of our global community is dependent upon this information and the people who collect it and the people who can define the needs for this. Societal services and economies are dependent upon a predicted ocean to inform safe transportation routes, methods of transportation, food security, real estate values, economic values, insurance, and the resilient infrastructure planning that many nations are now undertaking. The predicted ocean is remarkably important to our success for sustainable development of the ocean. Detlef.
Thank you, Greg. So essentially, this leads us actually into the question, what is the benefit of a predicted ocean? To some extent, Greg already answered that question, but let's get back to this. We already heard that the ocean has an enormous impact on our life, on our planet, in fact. So it's climate, it's food resources, we have heard that already, it's the environment, other significant component, and I mentioned already several. In fact, most of the outcomes of the decade are concerned with this. So by understanding how the system works, so how it works today, but also how it works in the future, in this ever-changing climate system or system ocean and its conditions, we really will get to a predicted ocean. It really means that we not only understand, we will be able to predict it and develop information into the future. And so by doing so, we will be able to sustain our ecosystem, and that means we are part of the ecosystem, so we should not forget this. Essentially, we are developing science for the ocean we want. I mean, it's one of really the headlines of the UN decade. And having the ability to develop a predicted ocean is really working towards this goal. Now, if advancing the field, it really means that knowledge and solutions for sustained ocean ecosystems and economy are achieved and need to be achieved by increasing access to data, by increasing modeling capabilities, skills of the model, by actually improving the information that we can develop that users need, by advancing capacities, and by also revolutionizing, in some sense, technologies to do this all. And this is really what we want to discuss over the next hours, over the next 48 hours, in fact, over the next decade, because that's really what the UN decade will address. And here, today, in this room, if you want, the virtual room, we first of all want to discuss this in the sense of two questions. What are the compelling issues that need to be addressed over the next 10 years, really to reach this goal? The second question, what is the state of science to do so, and where are our gaps? Because this is really what we need to fill over the next 10 years as an outcome of the UN decade. And with this over, back to Craig.
Detlef, thank you. And to everyone who has joined us, thank you. And I hope that you can stay with us over at least the next 4 hours, but please do remember that this will go on for 48 hours with up to 33 satellite activities that are taking place, and you can access those on the front page of the web offering that Monica had acquainted you with in the beginning of this session, and through which you were able to join here. The answer to those questions are going to be dealt with by experts who will be offering very shortly the plenary talks, experts who will be in panel discussions on these very subjects, and then also through the satellite offerings that we have. And those satellite offerings relate directly to those programs and projects that are already accepted in the UN Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development as endorsed programs. So we have an opportunity here to learn what's happening with the decade, why a predicted ocean is important, and exactly what we're doing in pursuit of that. So I'm grateful that you're with us, and I hope you can stay and learn a lot. We will be back at the close of the 4-hour session today in order to give you a summary that Detlef and I will construct. And just please appreciate, from Detlef's perspective, a career-long expert who's been working in these fields as a scientist. On my side, I'm part of a federal government that sponsors much of this science, and I think we could bring a very diverse perspective to these activities, and thank you for joining us to take this journey with us.
Thank you, Craig. Before we actually get now into the details, let's talk a little bit about the core event, which we are in the middle now, and what will follow. Essentially, what will follow has 3 elements, 3 parts. The first one is the high-level keynote section, where high-level perspectives of various themes will be provided, addressing the topics of the need of a predicted ocean, the potential outcome to humanity and the ocean. I'm not forgetting, we want to have an ocean we need. A vision for 2030 and beyond of what the predicted ocean will do. So what will we get out? And last not least, a critical infrastructure. So what do we really need in terms of input in infrastructure funding, support, coordination need to achieve this goal? So this will be really discussed during the keynote, and then we will continue with 2 roundtable discussion groups, addressing various aspects of how can we work towards implementing the concept of an integrated global observing system and a global modeling or a modeling system that is required, serving many user needs. So having always the user as in our view, we really want to serve the community, not just doing the science, we want to get the benefit out. And participants of these 2 panels will provide a set of recommendations on how to better integrate and connect the value chain that really will serve the community. Now, we will follow, as Craig already mentioned, we will not finish with this core event. We will, in fact, it's just the opening of this 48-hour laboratory. And immediately after we close here, in fact, really immediately, the first satellite events will start. The aim of these satellite activities is to diversify representation in ocean sciences, showcase undertaken efforts that will really take place during the next 10 years, strengthen the dialogue, and raise awareness for the UN decade. And these will run for 48 hours. In fact, the closing session that Craig already mentioned will start when satellite activity still will take place. We will basically, with the 33 satellite events, we will be able to go twice around the Earth with the sun, and we invite everybody to really follow this. Before we turn over now to the keynote session, I really want to mention that there still is a predicted ocean expert team that has worked effortless to actually develop this. And we will get back to this, but already at this point, we want to thank them for developing this. And now with this, I will turn over to Judith Giblin to moderate the next session. Judith is a Senior Technical Officer in Oceanography in Geosciences, Energy, and the Maritime Division of the Pacific Community. And with this, over to you, Judith.
Thank you, Detlef. Bulvanaka. Wishing you all a warm welcome from the Fiji Islands. My name is Judith, and I will be the moderator for the first half of this session. As a daughter of the Pacific, I have seen the coastal families that rely on subsistence fishing for their life. Have a common thing observed are the damages that tropical cyclones, high swells, and the threat of tsunamis have on our Pacific Island countries. By strengthening ocean predictive services and early warning forecast systems, coastal communities can receive more awareness and have informative disaster information delivered in a timely and accurate manner. For this early session, the first 3 keynote speakers will address various aspects related to a predicted ocean, from benefits to society and examples for products and services. Feel free to add your questions to the chat box so we can answer them in the Q&A session planned after the 3 presentations. Let me first introduce the keynote speaker, Wendy Watson-Wright, founder and CEO of 7 Mile Bay in Canada. Her keynote speech covers the benefits of a predicted ocean to society. Let's welcome Wendy.
so much, Judith, for the very kind introductions, and greetings from Epaquet.
Yeah, that's what happens when you're live and when you try to host a conference all around the world with digital technology, with home offices. I think we've all been in that situation more often than we care to wish for. But Detlef, it's of course a pity because we were just about to hear there from Wendy the significance of a predicted ocean. I know that you touched upon that already in your introduction, but can you sort of fathom where she was headed to?
Well, it's hard to predict where she wanted to go, and I'm pretty sure she wanted to, in particular, highlight the impact for society. So the significance, I mean, you can come from the physical side and you can come from the societal side, the user side. But I think it's easy to, first of all, think about what's the ocean doing, what's the predicted ocean really delivering. And we start, for instance, with the heat uptake of the ocean. If it comes to climate change, it's 95% or so that of the increased heat of the Earth system that the ocean is taking up. And so the predicted ocean would actually tell us how much heat is going into the ocean, how much sea level rise would we get from this. And of course, you do want to predict it. If you are on a low-lying Pacific islands, of course, you want to know how much sea level is rising there. And so this is where we have immediately the impact for society, in particular for the coastal societies. But you also can think of the carbon sink. And the ocean is actually taking up 1/4 of the emitted anthropogenic carbon. And so if that wouldn't be the case, there's actually another quarter that the ecosystem on land is taking up. But if that wouldn't be the case, we would have much more carbon in the atmosphere, heating up the atmosphere even more. Yeah. And so this is and the predicted ocean has to deal with it in various different things. The first one is the carbon uptake in the ocean increases the acidity of the ocean, the pH value. That has a big impact on the ecosystem. So, for instance, the algae have little shells, and so if the ocean becomes more acid, the algae will suffer from that. But there's also this question in the future, can the ocean in fact take up that carbon part in the future? You can imagine the ocean is getting warmer, that actually means the ocean stratifies.
Well, it'll also affect the ecosystem within the ocean, affect every life within the ocean.
Yeah. I mean, first of all, through the acidity, but the thing is that if you warm up the ocean, you cap the ocean. The ocean actually becomes more stratified, so the exchange with the atmosphere is being hindered. So we assume, for instance, that the future ocean will not be able to take up so much carbon anymore than today. That means actually that the increase of carbon in the atmosphere increases. So this is all benefit of the predicted ocean.
Just to set my mind at rest, because I'm not a scientist, but I'm very interested in as a whole topic. But if you like, because Craig said at the beginning, I mean, there are the end users, and you pointed it out. You can't sort of feed them with tons of data. They don't know what to do with it. They need recommendations. So see me as such an end user. When you say in the future the ocean can't take up that much carbon anymore, what are we talking about with future? 10 years, 100 years? Do we have any idea about that?
Well, the next 10 years will not change so much, but the next 50 to 100 years will change. And so this is where climate projection, for instance, will become important. It's really sort of 50 to 100 years, although over the next 10 years, 20 years, sea level, for instance, will change. I mean, there's no question about it. But we need to plan ahead of time. And if it comes to the users, the end users is the ecosystem also in the ocean. We are not the only guys on the Earth living. And so the living part on the livelihood on Earth, for instance, depends a lot on oxygen. A more stratified ocean, we basically know that there will be regions in the future with less oxygen. So this is also a recommendation, an information that we need to provide to users because it has an impact on the fisheries, it has an impact on the health of the ocean, and so this is still all in the ocean, the physical side, and we as scientists, of course, have to translate this into recommendations, into addressing users' needs, and of course, fishing, for instance, is one thing that immediately affects many cultures. that depend on the food out of the sea. But it's also the health of the ocean. If we want to and make vacation, we go to the North Sea. We want to enjoy ourselves. And of course, a healthy ocean is really what interests us. And that also, the predicted ocean needs to tell us what we need to do to keep that system as it is. It doesn't belong to us. We are part of the system. And through this information, we really want to make sure that we keep the system as it should be.
So the predicted ocean, again, with me as the sort of complete outsider, is a little bit like the crystal ball. I mean, Craig was going on about the weather forecast and so forth, what a predicted ocean can eventually tell us. But a predicted ocean also means that scientists can already sort of gather data and information by looking at the ocean now in order to tell us, listen, this is what's going to happen in a year from now or 2 years if we don't act, if we don't change things.
Yeah, this is exactly true. There's one element. Basically, we can actually use the information, the knowledge we have about processes. At the end, it comes back to what's the CO2 content in the atmosphere, how much CO2 do we emit, because the entire system, the change of the system depends on the emission. And this is where the crystal ball actually breaks down, because it's very hard to really predict the pathway of the emissions. And that's why, for instance, in the IPCC process, we have different scenarios that we follow, kind of what if actually the emission continues like today, or if we really mitigate very strong, maybe even having negative emission, that we can kept the temperature rise to 1.5 degree. And that's where, at this point, we still cannot predict exactly what will happen. We can only investigate under which conditions what could happen and what should we do. And that's where, yeah, I mean, I wish the crystal ball would actually tell this also to us. But that's where a lot of social science actually comes in, and understanding the economy, understanding social development. But one thing is clear: if we, for instance, want to limit temperature increase to 1.5 degree or even 2 degrees, we need a transition of the entire society that is stronger than anything that existed before. It's actually like a industrial revolution, but in a different sense. A different sense. And that's really where we have to make progress, because we have 10 years to respond if we want to really limit the temperature increase to 1.5 or 2 degrees, as a Paris Agreement anticipates. But the development is not yet that. I'm a little bit doubtful that we can reach 1.5 degrees, maybe 2 degrees.
Oh yeah, but that's, as we know now, that's not good enough. And just in order to give you an update, we're of course still trying to get Linda and her panel back. Everybody here behind the scenes is working frantically to sort of re-establish all the connections. But in the meantime, we don't want to leave you sort of left alone wherever you are in the world. Maybe it's early in the morning, the sun is shining, and you think, okay, this doesn't work, I go out for a walk. Don't, because we will get them back. And also Detlef has an awful lot of interesting things to say, because Detlef, if we just remind ourselves that this panel was actually focused on exploring the benefit of a predicted ocean for society, but also later on, and hopefully we will hear it from the keynote speakers that were lined up to do so, the kind of instruments, the kind of products that are already available to do so. I know that you know your stuff, so you probably can help us here already. I mean, how well equipped are we at this point, even without the Ocean Decade that is trying to really sort of source all the knowledge from scientists around the world? How well equipped are we in order to have a well-functioning predicted ocean?
Well, I think we don't start from scratch. Essentially, over the last few decades, we have developed already something like a weather forecast in the ocean. Basically, we do have an operational oceanography component in Europe and around the world. And it started actually under the name Good Day about 30 years ago, roughly, to develop this. I was, in fact, part of the initial kind of raising it from the ground. And this is working. I mean, essentially, we have now predictions and can start, but it's first of all very much oriented towards the the physical side. So we can look into how the wave field will develop over the next 7 days or so that the shipping routing can be adjusted.
This is like sort of on site, as we say.
We are on site. If we want to get to, for instance, the ecosystem predictions or the chemical predictions or the carbon uptake in the ocean, I think this is where we really need to dig in and start developing further. But I think it's encouraging what we have. We don't start from scratch. I think the Ocean Decade actually has a very good starting point. And so I'm really looking forward to use it, to expand it, to develop, in fact, the user connection.
And to learn more about it, because I'm just hearing that we do have Wendy back on the phone, and I see the pictures, at least, of the other keynote speakers. So, Wendy, if you can hear me, let's just give it another try.
I can hear you, Monica.
Brilliant. So if you want to pick up from where we left you, or nobody is contradicting me, also start from the beginning, because there was a lot of interference and we probably lost a lot of what you shared with us earlier.
Okay, well, thank you again. And, as you might know now, although I'm getting some feedback, Monica, just so you know, but I didn't really want to go to the second slide yet, but that's okay. We've already heard what is a predicted ocean. And I think that Craig did a great job of describing it. But again, the decade is going to accomplish the predicted ocean by expanding ocean observation, by ensuring more complete accounts of ocean processes, by building on advances in ocean robotics, such as ROPOS, which is shown here, and by promoting multi-stakeholder contributions by governments, the private sector, and citizens. And if we could go to the next slide. I think this is really important here. And the next slide should have a couple of pictures on it. I'm not sure if it does. Nope. Somehow my slide got neglected, but it is important that we ask ourselves whether predicted ocean is the correct term. Now, according to the Harvard Business Review, prediction is possible only in a world in which events are preordained and no amount of action in the present can influence future outcomes. So prediction is concerned with future certainty, while forecasting looks at how hidden currents in the present, please don't go ahead yet, signal possible changes in direction. So the primary goal of forecasting is to identify the full range of future possibilities, which is really what we're discussing here. And whether we use prediction or forecast is not the major issue, of course, but I do believe words matter, which is why I brought it up. And as a speaker, as you know, I was asked to focus on 4 questions: the benefit of a predicted ocean for society, where we are within the value chain, what are the societal aspects of the predicted ocean for the science community, society, and co-development, and what are 3 recommendations needed to achieve a predicted ocean by 2030. So according to Ocean Predict, which Detlef just mentioned actually, is the former GDI or GDE, to operate in the ocean and make use of its resources in a sustainable way, describing and predicting the ocean is essential. This requires first and foremost knowledge of its status and functioning. Now, understanding the ocean, accurately forecasting it, and distributing that knowledge effectively provides societal benefit by supporting sustainable development, and I might add environmental stewardship, enhanced resilience, and blue economy growth. And we heard of examples from Detlef and Craig. Next slide, please. In other words, this is all about preparedness. That is, generating the knowledge which will allow us to make preparations to prevent damage and protect ourselves, or to take advantage of conditions which favor recreation, commerce, food harvesting, or whatever. But unfortunately, predictions or forecasts are too often ignored. Very recently, we heard from Sonia Seneviratne, and I hope I didn't butcher her name, who is an IPCC author, who expressed frustration in saying, there is no point for us to just observe what a disaster is unfolding if nobody is going to do anything about it. So what we are really discussing here is the potential benefit to society of a well-predicted ocean if
someone takes the forecast seriously and does something in response. Next slide, please. Moving on to value chains, the overarching aim, of course, is to deliver the most value for the least cost. And the expectation is that the decade will respond well to the goal of establishing the ocean value chain from observations through research to long-term societal benefits. So far, it seems that the most progress has been made in ocean observations and data. Next slide, please. Now, according to the European Marine Board, in their recent policy brief, which is shown on the left of this slide, ocean observations form the basis of the value chain toward public benefit. They provide the data used in models and analyses to create information, which is in turn turned into knowledge by resource managers and policymakers, and used to enact change as well as advance scientific knowledge and understanding. Next slide, please. Now, on the data side, a recent initiative of the OECD and others explored pathways through which marine data are used in the UK and transformed into actionable information, creating systematized value chains for the first time. And using these systematized value chains, they mapped how marine data flow from diverse fields of use, like climate science or conservation, into actions actually taken, such as managing marine resources. And during last week's webinar on this work, they confirmed they were able to see the links between the marine data, the users, and the actions taken, such as decisions made. So we seem to be making progress. Yet in the foreword to the Second World Ocean Assessment released earlier this year, Antonio Guterres, Secretary General of the UN, wrote, and I quote, "In 2015, the first World Ocean Assessment warned that many areas of the ocean had been seriously degraded, the greatest threat to the ocean being the failure to deal with the many pressures caused by human activities. The message in the Second World Ocean Assessment is that the situation has not improved," end quote. With so many years of so much energy, political action, investment, studies, and conferences, some might argue that we've hardly moved along the value chain at all. But of course, we must continue to try. Next slide, please. So concerning societal aspects of a predicted ocean, it's not enough to satisfy those of the science community alone. Our work must extend meaningfully into urgent action everywhere for everyone. No place and no person is immune, and no one nation can go it alone. Co-development of meaningful ocean forecasts is essential, and our collaborative successes, of which there will be many, must extend beyond conventional interaction, from bottom-up local cooperation within communities to national legislation to regional collaboration, international treaties and enforcement, to public and private engagement and communication worldwide. Capacity sharing rather than capacity building must become the norm, because we all need to learn from each other and with each other. Academics with holders of indigenous, local, and traditional knowledge, developed with the developing countries, hard with soft disciplines, and so on. And the technologies developed must be accessible and workable for all. No one must be left behind. Next slide, please. So what do I believe are three possible actions to achieve a predicted ocean by 2030? Next slide, please. First, we must prepare a workforce, one that sees the ocean, in this case, ocean forecasting, as an enticing career choice. In the recent Elsevier publication, Preparing a Workforce for the New Blue Economy, Lisa Hotaling, co-editor with Rick Spinrad, herself argues that members of the workforce will require a transdisciplinary understanding of the ocean and the ability to integrate science concepts, engineering methods, business acumen, and socio-political considerations. In addition, and potentially one of the most important skills, the ability to collaborate within a transdisciplinary team. And as our colleague Martin Visbeck says, scientists will need to work closely with decision makers and society at large to get the ocean back on track. Now, we must begin early developing this workforce, engaging school children through to young adults, and making them aware of the myriad possibilities and opportunities for a career of ocean forecasting, and all it entails. And I would be remiss, as gender focal point of the UN Group of Experts on the Scientific Aspects of Marine Environmental Protection, or GSAMP, if I did not stress that we must ensure this workforce is diverse with respect to gender, culture, geography, age, and experience, with every effort made to ensure justice, equity, and inclusion. Next slide, please. Second, to generate the interest and understanding so that such a workforce can be developed, a massive global campaign should be created and funded for ocean literacy and public engagement, including community science, about the value of the oceanic systems to our future survival and the need to be able to forecast what those systems will entail. This would be for all, including landlocked nations, at a scale whereby no one, including and perhaps especially political leaders, can claim ignorance nor immunity, and no one can be unaware of the critical need for observations, data, and modeling for accurate forecasts. No one can be ignored in a universal societal response to the challenges before us. And I would note that on the right, the picture is of my granddaughter a few years back. Next slide, please. Now, third, we must generate investment. Huge national and regional financial investments are needed in infrastructure, as Detlef was indicating. Incentives and subsidies can provide protection, sustainable, and equitable application of such assistance worldwide. The infrastructure must include technologies and instruments for novel means of observing, handling data, and modeling to turn it into knowledge, and these technologies must work for all. So how do we generate those investments? Well, we're already seeing fairly large contributions, such as those from Nippon, the Musk Foundation, Blue Climate Initiative, and others. And we need to capture the imaginations of even bigger investors, like Jared Isaacman, who is bankrolling SpaceX's first private flight into orbit later today, weather willing. But there are also equally important smaller scale examples like the Fathom Fund, which is a crowdfunding initiative by NEOPAR, the Marine Environmental Observation, Prediction, and Response Research Network in Canada, whose purpose is to allow the general public to help decide which ideas will become funded projects. These types of initiatives could work in all parts of the world. Now, some might say there is no way we can have an accurately predicted ocean by 2030, but no one would have believed we could have an effective COVID vaccine within a year either. Investment, commitment, support, and the coming together of the brightest and most motivated to tackle the urgent can obviously work wonders. Next slide, please. So we are at the crossover point from words to deeds. We must move beyond what we know to what we do. And as infectious disease researcher Jeremy Farrar says, everything starts with smarter surveillance. If you don't see, you will always respond too late. The 2021 IPCC report makes it clear. The scientists have told us that we have run out of time. There's a consensus of need, a commonality of interest, innumerable plans of action, global public and private funds to be invested in science and beyond science, to solutions invented by science, enabled by each and every one of us, interconnected by the sea. Next slide, please. So I close with a photo taken from my home in Prince Edward Island, Canada, where every day I see the changing moods of this part of the global ocean, which makes me fervently hope that we will indeed have a well-predicted ocean by 2030. Danke schön, thank you, Walalen.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Wendy Watson-Wright, for your presentation, for your keynote. I'm so glad we got you back. It would have been a shame missing this presentation. Thank you so much for your patience also. And the same, of course, goes to the other keynote speakers and to Judith. I'll hand back to you in just a second. Let me just apologize once again. We ran into some major technical hiccup, something that normally, actually, it never happens. But as you know, there's an exception to every rule. And this time it did happen. But fingers crossed, we're good to go now. Sadly, we've lost a lot of time, which is why for this session, unfortunately, we won't be able to fit in the Q&A session. But please, everybody out there, keep your comments and your questions coming in anyway in the chat. It's good to know what you're thinking. We can review it afterwards. Everybody has access to it. And one last favor I have to ask. I'm the bearer of bad news, I'm afraid. The other two keynote speakers, please, if you could try and slightly shorten your presentation, obviously not omitting the most important points. And with that, it's over to you again, Judith. This is your session.
Thank you, Monica, and thank you everyone for staying with us. Let's present our next keynote speaker, Ariel Troisi, Chairperson for the Intergovernmental Oceanography Commission, IOC UNESCO in France. His presentation will be on short-term forecasts and outlooks for marine conditions. Over to you, Ariel. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Judith, for your presentation. And to Monica, I'll try to be brief and speak fast so we can get back some time. So good day to all in different time zones. I will just share with you some thoughts on short-term forecasts and outlooks for marine conditions. There's no doubt that short-term forecasts are invaluable, but the key element there is the quality of our forecast tied to the resolution and the capacity to resolve mesoscale meteorological systems. And that's critical for coastal areas as well as for open seas. And open seas is, for example, where we'll have the greatest impact because it's where we have fewer observations and meteorological events, which will modify wave height, for example, can develop very quickly. Even more so when severe events of small scale and not so simple to solve it by modeling have increased in frequency almost all over the world due to the impact of climate change. Our understanding of the variability of the ocean and the related impact on our society through sustained ocean observations and ocean science will be of vital importance for the benefits of nature and humankind. Can we move to the next slide, please? I will briefly cover four aspects or four dimensions of something as critical as short-term forecasts. And these elements are observations, services, resolution, and communication. So if we can move to the next slide, please, you will find here the image in the center. It's extracted from the Global Ocean Observing System report card for 2021. And what is showing there, among other dimensions, is the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on ocean observing activities and the remarkable effort of the international community to carry on observing operations under pandemic restrictions. Throughout 2020 and parts of 2021, several networks were impacted by the pandemic with an overall 10% decrease in time data distribution, much greater for some networks than others, and a 15 to 20% decrease in vital maintenance operations, even threatening to create an ocean data blind spot that could disrupt forecasts and hamper our understanding of in the open. Our friend and colleague Craig McLean was saying, if you like your 7 to 10 days forecast, thank an oceanographer. Well, we have been facing huge challenges due to this situation for the last year and a half. At a certain point in time, nearly all oceanographic research vessels were called back to the home ports, and some commercial ships were unable to contribute their voluntary observations. Ocean buoys and other systems did not have planned maintenance, leading to premature failure. And all that was affecting our ability to generate and produce short-term forecasts. When you look at this image, and you may have a false sense of, okay, there's a full coverage throughout the oceans. But if you look carefully, each of those points representing part of an observing network, it's bigger than any major city, and it's bigger than many island states. So in fact, we have huge gaps. On the right-hand side, you have three small images of our world. The top one is aircraft observations. The middle one ships observations, and the lower one, it's surface drifters. And then it is clear that we have huge areas of our ocean that are undersampled, and with that, our ability to produce short-term forecasts is hampered. Can we move to the next slide, please? Going briefly to services. So when we talk about short-term forecasts and the outlook for marine conditions, who are we serving? Well, it's a wide range of industries, from marine shipping to fisheries to renewable energy. We rely on this data as a crucial component of the daily operations. At any given time, operational marine applications in the private and public sectors are critically dependent upon reliable monitoring and forecasting of the ocean. Effective port management, as an example, depends on specialized and operationally implemented wave and ocean circulation forecast models, which rely, once again, on in-situ observations for their accuracy and validation. Maritime shipping, here we have some examples. Let's say route optimization, vessel performance, even offshore marine markets. This is critical for the daily operations. But also, in the case of shipping, the industry plays a vital role in the global markets because it's supporting complex supply chains needed for transporting food, goods, energy, materials, you name it. Once again, we have fishing industry, aquaculture, leisure and sports, coastal engineering. Coastal communities are highly dependent on the short-term forecasts. And of course, this is a critical input for warning systems when related to ocean hazards. Once again, let me insist on we need to take into consideration our services for open ocean areas. That's critical. Conditions can change very rapidly, and we need to provide them with the best information available. Next slide, please. So we move now very quickly into resolution. In the upper left, you find an image of the footprint of advanced scatter emitter sensors from the METOP satellites that are providing detailed global observations of atmosphere, ocean, and land. In general, meteorological systems in course of high energy and waves can be followed well in advance in open ocean, unless there are sudden events. That is why the forecasts have to improve the resolution as well as the frequency. And now, take into consideration our polar regions, like other services, concentration and state of development of sea ice, as well as iceberg drift, are in dire need of accurate short-term forecasts. And very few forecasts of this type are available around the world, and just a couple of them are short-term. So what is important here is that we need to increase the resolution of our wave modeling and ice charting, and this will also lead to more accurate route planning. And of course, an increase of satellite data is critical for better resolution and forecasts to support decision making. Can we move to the next slide, please? Let's go to communication. So how do we communicate all this? We have gathered our data. We have analyzed and synthesized this data. We have aggregated this information and assimilated to our models, and we have produced, we have generated our services. We have our products, our forecasts. How do we communicate this? Well, we have a wide range of mechanisms to communicate. But it's normal when thinking in terms of the ocean. Yeah, if you're near to the coast, you will have VHF voice radio. If you're in open ocean, you will have HF voice radio, radio fax, satellite communications. It will come via internet. If you're close to the coast, you will have your own cell phone networks. But the great question is our product fit for purpose? Are this short-term forecasts fit for purpose? Are the stakeholders able to understand and properly use the information we are providing? Are we working together with them? Can we find new ways to communicate? Weather and wave forecasts have to be provided simultaneously to coastal and offshore users. The agencies that produce this forecast must ensure this simultaneous information and include wave forecasts in coastal regions. So the combination of weather and waves is what ultimately affects greatly these areas. So we have to look into that very carefully. Let's go to the next slide, please. And I'm trying now to wrap up. So what's important here? We need to improve the resolutions of our resolution of our models, global, regional, and local scales. That's one point. We need to take care properly of open ocean, not only the data gap we have there, but increasing the resolution and the frequency of our forecasts for this particular area. In the center of the slides, well, this is what I was mentioning a few seconds ago, just the need to provide this information simultaneously to those offshore and to those stakeholders in the coastline, supporting decision makers, supporting civil defense, supporting industry, engineering. On the top right of the slide, you will find something that is critical. We cannot insist more how important it is for all of us to have a sustained, reliable ocean observing system. That is critical. We need sustained observations. The other points I would like to reflect, we should and cannot forget about polar regions. And finally, we need to work in communication, in our communication with the stakeholders, in the co-design under this umbrella that we have in the decade of co-design, co-development, and co-delivery. We need to work with our stakeholders to improve our services and provide fit-for-purposes solutions to the requirements that our community has. So finally, and now I got to the last slide, please. The powerful vision of the decade provides a convening framework for diverse stakeholders to co-design and co-deliver transformational science for the future of our ocean. We have an opportunity to further develop solution-oriented services and tools, promote an extensive stakeholder engagement network to catalyze new partnerships, attracting participation from a wide range of stakeholders, that's research institutes, governments, UN entities, NGOs, industry, philanthropy, community groups. We need to work more on that. No, not one of this can take care of this by himself or herself. We need to work together. We need this network, or this engagement network. As quoting now philosopher Mario Bunge, as big questions come in bundles, they have to be tackled systematically and systemically. And this will be one of our major challenges throughout this decade and beyond. So with this, I just wanted to share with you some ideas on short-term forecasts. Thank you very much for your attention. And now back to you, Judith.
Thank you, Ariel, for your engagement on the recommendations, as well as seeing the observation systems and linking it to communications. Your message on how is our product fit for purpose hit a resonant note, and I thank you for bringing that up. Our next keynote speaker is Fang Li, Professor on Physical Oceanography at First Institute of Oceanography, Ministry of Natural Resources, China. His keynote speech will be on the requirements of long-term forecasts of the ocean state. Let's welcome Fang Li.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. It's my great pleasure to share some scientific views with all of you on requirements of long-term forecast of the ocean state. My speech includes 4 parts. The first part will be requirement of long-term forecast and faced scientific challenges. As we all know that the UN Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development was approved by UN Assembly at the end of last year and has officially started from the beginning of this year. According to the implementation plan, UN Ocean Decade has 7 outcomes, and this talk will focus on a predicted ocean. We need long-term prediction. The longer, the better. We even hope to predict the climate status 100 years later. However, the following figure tells us that we can only predict weather and ocean for several days with good to excellent accuracy. And this is one of the greatest contributions from scientific community based on their hard work for more than half a century. For more than 10 days, such as sub-seasonal, seasonal to even longer, it's still too hard for us to reach fair accuracy from poor. Why we could not give long-term accurate predict? Heat content is a core. As we know, the heat content of 3 meters seawater is equivalent to that of total air. So the upper ocean controls the long-term prediction for ocean and climate. So we can conclude that the ocean, especially the upper ocean, controls the prediction ability of ocean, weather, and climate. However, the following figures show the scientific challenges. In the upper ocean, there is a layer with uniform temperature and salinity called the mixed layer. The left figure shows the observed mixed layer, and the right is from simulation, which is too shallow compared with observation in summer. We could not properly simulate the ocean mixed layer, which has been a ground challenge for half a century. The true reason behind it is the lack of mixing in the upper ocean. Assume that we could properly predict the mixed layer in the upper ocean. Could we make a long-term prediction? Unfortunately, the answer is still no. The ocean, through a process of ice interaction, modulates the atmosphere. And our scientific understanding on ice interaction has been so poor. Here, we take momentum flux as an example. Traditionally, the drag coefficient of the wind stress is regarded as the linear function of wind speed U10, the wind speed at 10 meter heat. There are so many choices for the parameter for A and B. As we know, only one could be correct, and the right figure from observation shows that drag coefficient is not a linear function of U10. It will saturate at about 30 meters per second and then will decrease. Why have we been lacking of a deep understanding of ocean mixing and ice interaction? It is because of both of them are turbulence. Turbulence has been the greatest challenge from scientific point of view. Nobel Prize winner Heisenberg was asked what he would ask God, given the opportunity. His reply was, when I meet God, I'm going to ask him 2 questions. Why relativity and why turbulence? I really believe he will have an answer for the first. Fortunately, for the ocean mixing, we discovered that the non-breaking surface wave-induced mixing, BV, play a dominant role in the upper ocean. As we all know, all the spatial and temporal scales of surface waves are too small compared with those of oceanic and atmospheric circulations. Surface wave effects have been disregarded in ocean and climate models. For ice momentum flux, traditionally, the direction of wind stress follows the direction of wind, and this formula has been used in all ocean and climate models. However, observation evidence shows that the direction of wind stress and wind vector are different, sometimes even opposite on the ocean surface. That is also because of the existence of surface wave. For ice heat flux, albedo is one of the key parameters.
Fang Li,
in ocean. Yeah.
Your slides didn't move forward. Can you just check which slide you are talking about? Is the one that you see the ones that you wanted to show?
No, from my screen, I could not see anything. Okay.
So we see need for long-term prediction, longer the better the climate change. So we see right now forecast skill. Which slide are you talking about?
So from then on, I repeat again?
No, can you just tell us which slide you want to have?
So now I would like to have the slide, the 9.
Number 9. Number 9, please.
Number 9, yeah.
Air, sea, heat, and momentum fluxes.
Yeah, for air, sea, momentum flux.
Yeah, and please tell us when you want to forward the slides.
Okay,
thank you. Thank you.
So traditionally, the direction of wind stress follows the direction of wind, and this formula has been used in all ocean and climate models. However, observation evidence shows that the direction of wind stress and the wind vector are different, sometimes even opposite on the ocean surface. That is also because of the existence of surface waves. So next, please. For LC heat flux, albedo is one of the key parameters. In ocean and climate models, it is assumed to be 5.5%. Our recent observations show that albedo is totally different from 2% to 20%. It is also closely related with the surface wave. Next. So next, I will introduce a new era for ocean prediction. Next. As the ocean is so complicated, according to their spatial temporal scales, oceanographers have been separating ocean into surface wave, tide, ocean circulation into different streams, and made their predictions separately. This separation makes our research simple. At the other hand, unfortunately, this simple concept obstructs us from understanding all kinds of interaction processes in the ocean. For accurate long-term prediction, it is time for us to unify the whole ocean as a dynamic system through turbulence. Next page. Here, we show simulation results from new generation models. The bottom is observed ocean mixed layer depths. The middle is from traditional ocean model, which is much different with observation. And the top panel are from wave circulation coupled new generation models, which is quite similar to the observation. Next, please. PV theory has been tested by different model groups, including NEMO model of Europe. Here, I take FISAM model of RV Institute of Germany as an example. The simulation error of the global subsurface temperature is reduced from 1.2 degree to 0.1 degree. These promising results clearly indicate that the new era for long-term ocean prediction has started quietly. Next, please. I show one of the challenges of ACAM transport theory. The ACAM transport, due to the summer monsoon, south wind will be accumulated near the west coast of Hainan Island of China. So downwelling should exist. But from ocean satellite data, the cold sea surface temperature indicates it is upwelling. Only through coupling the tidal current, ocean model can simulate this upwelling process properly. Next. Based on the above scientific understanding, we developed the first surface wave tide circulation fully coupled model in the world. And it is not surprising at all. This new generation model performed best compared with all other ocean models. And we have been providing operational service to the world through Westpac official website since 2018. Next, I will introduce the prediction application in climate and tropical cyclones. Next, please. The upper figure is a multimodal mean sea surface temperature bias from CMIP 5. All of them are the most advanced climate models in the world. As we know, ENSO, with the sea surface temperature anomaly more than 0.5 degree in tropical Pacific, has so much influence on the world climate. The multimodal mean sea surface temperature bias for many climate models are more than 3 degrees. In fact, for any single climate model, the bias can be larger than 5 to 7 degrees. That means we could not make a long-term prediction of climate. Amazingly, by including surface wave in climate models, the sea surface temperature bias can be killed more than half. Next, please. GFDR of the United States, one of the world leading center for model development, tested the wave-induced mixing theory, and their climate model is much improved for summer mixed layer simulation in the upper ocean. Next, please. Finally, let's discuss the forecasting of tropical cyclone. During the past several decades, with tremendous effort from the scientific community, the forecasted track of tropical cyclones getting better and better. However, the forecasting intensity has had no any progress. Next, please. By including both the wave-induced mixing and sea spray from wave breaking into typhoon or hurricane models, the forecasting error for super typhoon could be reduced by 58%. This dramatic improvement can benefit the world people living in coastal areas suffering from tropical cyclones. Next, please. So finally, I would like to summarize the result. Next, please. My presentation has focused on model development, and the data are also quite important for long-term prediction. We will face a lot of challenges in observation, such as the high cost, parameter limited, space limited, and data share problems. Next, please. The following are take-home message. Firstly, the long-term prediction. It is time for us to regard the ocean as a unified dynamic system. Small-scale surface wave play dominant role in ocean turbulence and ice interaction. Secondly, with above scientific understanding, it's quite promising that we can have a much longer prediction ability on ocean, tropical cyclones, and climate, and even ocean decade. Thirdly, more data are never enough for better prediction. The transfer from scientific findings to operational forecast and then public service is the spirit of a predicted ocean. Next, please. So finally, let's predict together. Long-term accurate ocean prediction is coming very soon. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Fang Li, for your presentation. It was very informative on how ocean forecasts can be done for long-term predictive systems and the theory behind it, as well as the applications of these forecasts on tropical cyclones and sea surface temperature. I also would like to thank all the keynote speakers for your presentations and giving us insight on the benefits as well as examples of predictive services and products. So we were able to actually have one Q&A, one question to ask each of the moderators before we go on to the next session. So my question to each of you, if you could sum it up in 1 or 2 sentences, how can the decade help to ensure that models and forecasting services are communicated and applicable to end users? Thank you. Would Fang Li like to start?
I think the communication with the scientific community and the end user is very important. Otherwise, some scientific new scientific understanding, if some scientific understanding could not be applied into the the operation center, and that could not benefit the people. Thank you.
Thank you. Wendy, would you like to take the stage?
Yes, thank you very much, Judith. I think I answered that actually in my presentation. In order for the public, the question was how can it be communicated? And I do believe that ocean literacy, in this case, the importance of ocean forecasting, ocean literacy campaigns are absolutely necessary. And I think that we, as Peter Gluckman has said, not only what must we find funding for infrastructure, but we need to provide glue money. And that glue money really is the funding for the wider science policy and uptake ecosystem. And Peter Gluckman, of course, is the incoming president of the International Science Council. So again, I hate to keep beating the drum on ocean literacy, but I think in this case it's very important, and that all of the public needs to be involved in this. Citizen science helps, but we just need to do a lot more, a lot better. Thanks.
Thank you. And Ariel.
Yeah, thank you, Judith. I'm afraid I have little more to add to what Fang Li and Wendy have just expressed. I tend to go also with this important part of capacity development, where everyone understands how to obtain, produce, use the information and the services. And something that it's critical, I will insist always, we need the sustained and reliable observing system that will help us to develop the tools and provide the services that are fit for purpose for our community. Thank you.
Thank you, each and one of all of you. I really enjoyed your presentations, and I'm excited to see what the Ocean Decade has for us. Thank you, and I shall pass it on back to Monica. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much, Judith, and of course, the entire panel. Thank you so much for sharing your insights with us, even though we had some technical hiccups, but here we are, all is well. So thank you again, and I think it's time for a very, very, very short break, just for us to stretch our legs, open the window, get some fresh air, but don't be too long, not more than 5 minutes, and we'll be back with the next session, so see you then. Welcome back to our second Ocean Decade Laboratory, A Predicted Ocean. Now, the first hour we had some excitement, mostly because of some fantastic keynote speakers who gave us contributions on topics such as benefits of a predicted ocean to society, as well as examples of products and services. But there is so much more. And of course, we have several sessions still coming up. But before we go live to more of our fantastic speakers, we would like to do a little tour around the globe with you in order to meet some of the stakeholders and find out what their ambitions are and how they believe that the Ocean Decade can help preserve Earth's largest ecosystem, namely the ocean. Let's have a look at that.
I'm Ivanis Monteiro Silva. I'm a marine biologist, and I'm the Ocean Science Center Mindelo Laboratories Manager. OSCM is a permanent research and logistics basis as a modern hub for international marine research and education, providing to users several multipurpose laboratories and working space for scientific campaigns. I have the responsibility of analyzing all the samples that come to us. Maybe the most important is our monthly sampling at our Cape Verde Ocean Observatory. That is a mooring from where we take in situ measurements. The data we collect is to fit our database, trying to understand the effects of the climate change in our marine environment. We all know and we all understand that the water temperature is increasing, the sea level is also affected. A very important point is something that all our fishermen talk about. Day after day, they access less and less and less fish. As a result of the ocean decade, I would like to see humanity more aware of the importance of the oceans in our earthly experience. Exploring the oceans research, aware that we are part of the nature and not its owners. Only on this way we can make a sustainable exploration of all the resources and possibilities that the ocean puts in our disposal.
I'm Krista von Hillebrand Andrade, and I'm the manager of the Caribbean Tsunami Warning Program, which is located in Maya West, Puerto Rico. And our office is responsible for helping to coordinate the tsunami warning system for the Caribbean and adjacent regions. So one of the first things that I do every morning is I go into the IOC sea level monitoring facility and check to see what sea level data is available, what sites and sea level stations are working, and then also constantly checking and when any earthquake occurs in the region, what the magnitude, the size of that earthquake is, and then if there is any tsunami potential. The basis for a successful tsunami and other coastal hazard warning systems is collaboration and partnership. There is no country that can operate a tsunami warning system without collaboration with partners and scientists around the world. And to see in our region, every single country that has seismic data, which has sea level data, is sharing that data for this common good. But also when experts from around the region sit down and discuss, what are the faults, what are the sources from tsunamis, and come to a common understanding on which then we can do tsunami inundation and tsunami evacuation mapping, and just sharing that and working together to create these resilient communities. So many of us live along the coasts of the Caribbean, and we still don't understand that ocean. That ocean is the source of our livelihoods and our safety. And hopefully at the end of the decade, people will be able, through the science and the sharing of the science, will really be able to understand and comprehend how important the ocean is and how we need to take it in consideration for the decision-making process.
My name is Chip Cunliffe. I'm the Biodiversity Director at AXA XL, which is the property and casualty arm of AXA. And my role really is to understand how we impact nature and to develop tools and really work with the business to ensure that nature and biodiversity is part of our decision-making process. As part of that, we have a particular focus on the ocean through the Ocean Risk Initiative that was set up in 2017. And the idea behind that is really about how we drive a new narrative around the ocean and how it links to insurance. We're currently working on the development of a mangrove insurance product. For that, we need to understand the physical scientific basis of mangroves. the carbon sequestration value and indeed the resilience value that they provide as well, to be able to better determine and to be able to develop whether it's a parametric product or whether it's an indemnity product, the scientific understanding of those mangroves, of how the ocean interacts with them, also relating to wind speed, all of that actually provides us with a critical understanding of how we can develop those kind of products. So without the science, we can't do that. However, I'm very conscious of not having science for science sake. Science is really most useful when it is applied to specific use cases. One of those is a coastal risk index, where we're looking to integrate ecosystems into our flood hazard models. That really is a critical piece of work that we hope to be able to launch in the near future. I think a successful ocean decade by 2030 will focus on various elements. One is about increasing ocean literacy, about understanding the importance of the ocean in our daily lives. The other part will be around how the private sector can utilize the outcomes and the outputs of the research that's going to be taking place over the next 10 years or so. And if we can utilize that within our risk models, within our investments, and indeed our sort of daily decision making, then we will be in a better position in 10 years' time.
I'm Dr. Ian Skipper. I'm a senior lecturer at Victoria University of Wellington in New Zealand. I'm a volcanologist interested in volcanic eruption dynamics and the effect that volcanic activity has on the environment. So the mission of the Okeanos Foundation is to bring sustainable sea transport solutions to people of the Pacific. They provide a very practical solution for our access problems to these small volcanic islands. We need boats that can navigate shallow waters, land on beaches, and access all kinds of difficult areas. So they're ideal from that. But also they bring an element of traditional knowledge that links together Pacific voyaging communities throughout the world. Collaboration with local populations and local communities is absolutely essential. Now, for my project in particular, this is crucially important. One of the things we want to do is study some of the submarine volcanoes in the Vanuatu Arc. I had a concern that was, how on earth am I going to find these volcanoes in poorly mapped areas? There's very little information, and I could spend a lifetime looking for these volcanoes. The first day that I stepped onto the Vaka in Vanuatu, and I was talking with one of the crew members, and I mentioned this issue to him, and he just looked at me and said, "Oh, you mean where the bubbles are?" Yeah, I know exactly where those are. So without that local connection, I could spend a lifetime looking for this feature that I want to measure. As a result of the Ocean Decade, what I would like to see is borders to break down in the approach to ocean health. If the health of the ocean is going to be maintained, it requires that everyone around the world, all governments, all people, work together to improve and maintain ocean health. And that requires collaboration.
Well, hello, my name is Kate Moran, and I'm the president and CEO of Ocean Networks Canada, and we operate large ocean research infrastructure. So we monitor earthquakes, tsunamis, the chemistry, ocean acidification, ocean noise. We monitor aspects of the venting coming out of the seafloor. We monitor the surface ocean, waves and currents. And we even have a neutrino observatory in the deep ocean. 90% of life is in the ocean. We haven't even discovered all of it. So we need to understand the ocean in order to protect it and maintain it and ensure that there's a great amount of biodiversity. And it also continues to help us mitigate the impact of climate change. We have about 50% of the scientists that use our data, and our data are open and freely available over the internet, are from outside of Canada. It's essential for us to be partnering with these cohorts of international scientists because they bring new ideas, new concepts, new discoveries, and that allows us to continue to improve our observatory infrastructure to continue to serve the most advanced and the best science that's out there. People love the ocean, and if they understood how much the ocean is doing for the humanity while we're burning all these fossil fuels and actually causing damage to the ocean, I think that public awareness would drive us directly to reduce our emissions much more rapidly. I think the ocean plays a critical role in that understanding. So if that's the only outcome, it would be terrific. But we also have to protect much of the ocean space to keep the ocean healthy. And I hope that we can achieve those goals of large swaths of the ocean being protected at various levels.
Well, wonderful and fascinating to hear about all those activities in and with the ocean, all of course aimed at better understanding the ocean and by that help to preserve it for now and for future generations. And it's quite fascinating to also hear that it's good to listen to one another, scientists to locals, locals to scientists, collaboration, one of the key words I take from this short video there from our stakeholders. Now, this brings us to our next, the second session of this second Ocean Decade Laboratory, which will talk a bit about ecosystem implications, and we will also hear about various links of a predicted ocean to a healthy ocean. And this session will be chaired by Anne-Christine Zinkan. She's Program Manager at National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration at ECOP. She joins us from the United States of America, Washington, D.C. There she is. Anne-Christine, over to you.
Thank you so much, Monica, and I'm very happy to be here. As she said, my name is Anne-Christine Zinken, and I'll be the moderator for the second half of the keynote session. And I just wanted to quickly thank all the organizers for letting us early career ocean professionals have a seat at the table. I'm very excited to be here and introduce the next keynote speakers. And as Monica said, the second session will be addressing biogeochemical and ecosystem implications and the various links to a predicted ocean. So let me go ahead and introduce the first keynote speaker that will be talking about the predictions of long-term evolution of CO2. The keynotes will be presented by two presenters at this point, Janice Todd-Duha and Leticia Coutrim da Cunha. Janice is the Director General for Scientific, Technological, and Nuclear Development of the Brazilian Navy, and Leticia is the Assistant Professor at Rio de Janeiro State University in Brazil. Let's welcome both Janice and Leticia.
Thank you so very much. It gives me great pleasure to address this meeting, and I thank the organizers for that. Thank you, Anne. A landmark in our quest to providing society with the information needed for the advancement in understanding, responding, and eventually adapting to changing ocean conditions. A tough reality that is already happening. I believe the main driver to achieving our goals will always be our ability to communicate and make societies understand the science we make and how can our achievements benefit them locally, regionally, and globally. So I will therefore start bearing in mind we have a broader audience with a simple explanation on why are we so much interested in carbon studies. Can you project the first slide, please? The second then. Thank you. Well, this is it, because carbon is the essence of life. A major portion of the structure of any life form is composed of carbon and its compounds. Carbon atoms are everywhere, in plants, animals, oceans, air, rock, soil, etc. And it doesn't stay in one place, flowing from plants that absorbs atmospheric carbon through its transformation to animals that feed on them, moving up the food chain and ultimately transferring carbon back to the atmosphere through respiration, digestion, metabolism, or to the lithosphere via death and decay of organisms that after being buried for millions of years are converted into fossil fuels and when burnt, bring this carbon back to the atmosphere. So in a nutshell, there are major reservoirs of carbon in our planet, which are interlinked by flow of exchanges: atmosphere, terrestrial, biosphere, sediments, and the oceans. And this is on a very simplistic manner. So next, please. What we will like to cover in this short presentation are those 5 points. Next, please. We will concentrate with the CO2 in the ocean. Next slide, please. Next, please. And this figure illustrates the dynamical processes and integrated mechanisms in our climate system, taking into account the different atmosphere and ocean multi-scale interactions that happen as examples that need to be properly represented in our climate projections and to improve climate information. No doubt a great deal of exchanges happen in the system, as one can depict from this illustration, in different space and time scales in the oceans and in the atmosphere. These processes are the root of how air-sea, land-sea, and ice-sea interactions occur and act as a regulator for heat and carbon transport across those interfaces. A portion of this energy then penetrates to the ocean interior, thus affecting long-term trends and changes. I hope this is not too complicated for the great public to understand. And my idea was to very briefly provide you with a view of what is in front of us to make work as knowledge passed on to society. Next, please. A tribute to some programs that have made a huge contribution to global carbon projects, and I named 2 of them: the International Geosphere Biosphere Program, IGBP, that came to an end in 2015 after 3 decades of fostering international collaborative research and synthesis on global change. This program has worked in partnership with the International Human Dimension Program, and those 2 were very instrumental to provide the view for us to go on with other new programs. The WCRP has started some decades ago as well, but it brings the climate research priorities, challenges, and opportunities that we have ahead of us now. Next slide, please. From our very small regional scale, I wish to mention the Pirata program that is endorsed by WCRP and has been able to bring some important information to us. The tropical Atlantic being the 2nd largest source of CO2 in the atmosphere after the tropical Pacific. There is also significant interannual variability of air-sea CO2 fluxes that have been able to identify via the Pirata program, and this is closely linked to climate variability. Last but not least, the extent to which the ocean sink keeps pace with the anthropogenic CO2 emissions in the global carbon budget is still unknown. But that is certainly a priority for the Pirata backbone to address in the next years to come. Next slide, please. And I just wish to briefly let you know that 3 nations are really committed to that kind of information, and namely they are Brazil, France, and the USA in alphabetical order through 5 leading institutions that have been able to set up a planning phase back in the 1990s and carry on with those observations until now, under a new arrangement, a new memorandum of understanding already in place. Next, please. So this is exactly what we know. Oceanic and terrestrial carbon sinks are projected to continue to grow with increasing atmospheric concentrations of CO2. But the fraction of emissions taken up by land and ocean is expected to decline as the CO2 concentration increases. This is an information that we bring to society with a high level of confidence, and that derives from the assessment report 6 of IPCC, to which my dear colleague Letícia Cotrim is part to. So I give the floor to Letícia for what the future holds. Letícia, please.
Okay, so we can go on with the slides. Thanks very much, Janice. Great to see you all here. I'm Letícia Cotrim da Cunha, and I'm talking to you from Rio de Janeiro. You can go on showing the slides, please. And this is what we know, and now we go. There are 2 slides to skip. Yes. So now I'm talking about this is the illustration for this IPCC assessment. So in the different scenarios, the more CO2, if you look at only at the numbers, the more CO2 is emitted to the atmosphere, the more the land and the ocean will absorb the part of this excess CO2. But the proportion of it is going to decrease. It's decreasing with the high emission scenarios. For instance, if we have a look, people like to talk about the absolute numbers, but they have to look at the proportion of what's staying in the atmosphere and fueling climate change. So now let's move to the next slide. And this is I like very much this picture on these reddish areas of the ocean. So in the center we have Antarctica, and then we have the Atlantic, and we have the Pacific, and then Indian Ocean. To the back, the reddish areas is where the more anthropogenic carbon is entering the ocean. This is a comparison with the decade between 1994 to 2007. And this shows the different, how the oceans respond differently. And there's this geographically difference in the ocean sink. Next slide, please. So the present challenges are the following. You can go on. Next, please. Yeah, so I invite you also to consult this report from IOC about the questions and the challenges for the next decade for ocean carbon science. And then among the many questions that there are addressing regional variability and many other things is, will the uptake of anthropogenic carbon continue primarily as an abiotic process? And then on the next slide, I picked the only 2 of them. Next slide, please. Next, please. Yeah, thanks. So this is the second question is the role of biology on controlling part of this CO2 carbon, ocean CO2 sink in the ocean. And this is what the scenarios look like. So there's probably a decrease there's less confidence on the biological side, but this is a science priority for the decade. And we can go on. Next. Yeah, so just to show you quickly about the CO2, what we have in Brazil, CO2 ocean measurements. Next, please. This is a very quick map on the measurements we have on the pinkish and bluish on your right-hand side. It's the estimated fluxes. This is work in progress going on in Brazil. On your left-hand side, it's a reconstructed pH time series from one of the Pirata buoys. So there's ocean acidification going on in the tropical Atlantic as well. Next slide, please. And the main challenges, and this is for all over the places, is to have the same capacity for observations. And everybody using the same methods and the same good practices. And this has to be adapted regionally because of climate, because of geography and many other things, cultural issues. And everybody needs a permanent national ocean science policy. So have it in mind that the ocean is important for everyone. Next slide, please. And the coordination actions, because for the challenges, to tackle the challenges, we need coordination actions. Next. One big step was the signature of the Belém Statement in 2017 between Europe, South Africa, and Brazil. And the main goal is to strengthen the partnerships among the different countries, and also with the Galway statement from earlier in the North Atlantic. But it's also very important. We talked about building capacity and sharing, but there's also the cost sharing is an issue. And this matters because ocean sciences can be very expensive. And then on the next slide, please, I'm finishing the talk. There's in Brazil, there's this view of integrating ocean sciences, and even the creation of a dedicated institution, the IMPO. It's on your top at the right-hand side. And if we move on to the next slides, please. Yeah. And also the Ministry of Science and Technology is also really working for the decade. Next. And the ambition by 2030, next slide, please. I'm finishing. And there's an alignment with the WCRP, new structure with the lighthouse and especially the My Climate Risks. And this is within the Brazil scientific community and many other stakeholders as NGOs and also the government. And the last one, please. Yeah, so for this lighthouse activity, it's really important that we need to bring science from bottom to the top for what the society needs. And South America is willing to serve as a regional hub. And all together, it's CO2, but there's also heat in the ocean, the marine heat waves, deoxygenation, and many other problems. With that, I finish the presentation, and thank you very much for your attention, and we can discuss and talk about questions and doubts later. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Janice and Letitia, for your great presentation and for giving us such a detailed background on CO2 and what the current state is, the predicted state, and the impacts on our life. I want to move over to the next keynote speaker. The next keynote speaker is Beth Fulton. She has a 20-year career with the Commonwealth Scientific and Industrial Research Organization and is the Deputy Director at the Centre of Marine Socioecology in Australia. Her presentation will address ecosystem services and ecosystem predictions and the impacts on marine biodiversity. The floor is yours, Beth.
G'day, thank you. It's a great honour to be speaking to you today. If we can bring up the slides, that'd be great. Yes, I'm going to talk to you today about how you model ecosystems and marine biodiversity so you can understand both how they work today, but also into the future. Next slide, please. First of all, I'm going to start off by something we do here in Australia, which is to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land and sea country that we live on and to pay my respects to their elders, past, present and emerging. Thanks. Next slide, please. So models are used in every day. We've heard quite a lot from previous speakers about how they're used to help industry in making their day-to-day decisions and into planning around what you can do where into the future. And that's equally important about biodiversity and the ecosystem services it provides, both in terms of fisheries, shipping, but also coastal protection. Next slide, please. So we've also heard quite a lot from previous speakers about the advances that have been made in oceanographic forecast models. So the physical climate and ocean models around the world, and how finely resolved they're becoming, including tides and waves and that kind of thing. There's been equal kinds of advances on the ecological side, on the ecosystem modelling side, and we're getting better and better at the resolution and the processes that we can include. So there's now many thousands of regional models dotted around the world, but we're also creating new models and new ways of looking at the oceans, because ecology is actually far more complicated in a way than the physics. So you need lots of different ways of thinking about it to make sure that you really understand what's going on. Next slide, please. And that's really important, because when you can look at the moon or Mars, you can get into really fine detail of what's happening on the surface of those planets. You can see individual craters and waveforms and that kind of thing. But in Earth, you can't actually do that, because the water acts like a blanket and hides everything that sits underneath. Next slide, please. And within that ocean sits 75% of all the living animals on the planet. So it's a really biodiverse, really vital part of the world. Next slide, please. It includes some of the largest species that have ever lived on Earth, right down to some of the smallest viruses. Many of us are very familiar with the cute and cuddly things that the ocean produces from all those wonderful pictures on conservation art and on the internet. But it also includes some of the oddest kind of animals you can imagine that have literally inspired horror movies such as Alien. It's also got some of the oldest species on the planet. Now, the modern versions of those species may have changed a little bit since the past, but in reality, their form hasn't changed very much in hundreds of millions of years. Next slide, please. And that ocean and that biodiversity is under increasing pressure. So there are many ways that ocean acidification and climate change are already modifying the ocean. But there's also the direct human interaction. So while climate may have increased ocean temperatures by a couple of degrees or acidification through the last 30 to 40 years, in my lifetime, the way that we use the ocean has rapidly increased too. So both the agricultural revolution and the industrial revolution are happening in the oceans right now. Our production systems have increased by an order of magnitude or two in the last 40 years. The way that we take materials in and out of the oceans, whether it's extraction of energy or addition of pollution, has increased also by a couple of orders of magnitude. But in terms of infrastructure into the ocean, that has become a huge increase. Shipping is increased by over 7,000 times, and cables across the ocean floor have increased by more than 1,000 times in the last 30 years. And what we know about the ocean is actually sparse. So we know most about what happens up on the continental shelf, up in where that says the corals and stuff, that very fine area, down into the continental slope. Much deeper than that, and we don't know much at all. And in particular, we don't know much in that central part of the ocean, the sort of the mesopelagic part of the ocean, simply because we tend to sample across the surface or along the bottom, and we miss the center. Now, get an idea of how patchy that world is. The picture on the right-hand side there is an example of all the places that we've sampled. And you can see there's quite a lot of ocean still where we've never taken a sample. So how do we get to grips with doing that? Well, we use models to fill the gaps. Next slide, please. Yep. And it's only been in the last 150 years that we've come to appreciate that there's even life in that deep ocean. Before that, they thought it was basically a soup with nothing in it. And so in that last 150 years, we've been increasingly aware of things in the deep ocean, but it's still the case that every time we go out, we find more species than we've ever known in science before from that part of the ocean. Next slide, please. Luckily for us, there's some common drivers that shape the way where things live in the ocean. And those things are more easily measured. Things like depth and temperature, where the sunlight can penetrate, where there's primary production occurring, where oxygen sits. You can use a relationship between those drivers and where animals live to sort of map out where you expect species to be and where you expect things to be at their richest. Next slide, please. There's another way that you can look at modelling of the species, and that's actually to look at what the animals prefer. So where they sit today, where those conditions are, and then to look at where those conditions will be into the future. This is the same way they do it on land. And next slide, please. By layering up those different species models. Next slide, please. You can see, by layering up thousands of those species models, you can see where those species. So in this particular picture here, the red areas are where there's expected to be a lot of species, so mainly around islands in the tropical areas and particularly north of Australia into the archipelagos of Southeast Asia. That's the richest parts of the ocean sit in those areas. Next slide, please. And now if we project forward under moderate or a heavy emissions, you'll see that there's a dip in those tropical areas. That's where we expect to lose the most species, either because they go completely extinct or because they move to a different location. They move polewards, trying to follow the conditions that they prefer. Now, there will also be a homogenization of species. So as we lose some species, you'll see more of the same kind of species dominating around the world. But the key thing here is that the very same countries that will be feeling the largest effect on climate on land will also be feeling that effect in the ocean. So the countries with the least capacity to adapt, unfortunately. Next slide, please. There's another way of looking at modelling the oceans, and that's actually based on size. So we've known for the last 70 years that things in the ocean are based on size, whether it's movement or how they sense the ocean, the way that they feed, and indeed what they eat is all dictated by their size. So that's become a really useful shortcut way of modelling the ocean so that you can get very rapid models that are easy for people to work with, but can also best leverage the data to look at biodiversity more broadly. Next slide, please. So between all of those kinds of models I've spoken about and many more that I don't have time to talk about today, we can model pretty much in some way all of the physical processes and ecological processes that make up ecosystems, so how things move and eat and interact. That helps us understand how those ecosystems work, but also how they connect up into the human part of the world, to the fisheries and the way that we exploit them, so that we can model change now, but also into the future under pressure. Next slide, please. We're having to refine all of those models all the time, though, as we learn things and we know that we don't have things quite right. And one of the most recent advances has been around modelling evolution and biodiversity. So the best way of doing that is to play out the food web, and then for each of the species in the food web, play out its life history and reproduction, and to reflect that different species and different morphs peak at different points in the energy spectrum. So next slide, please. So you'll find that as you drive it with climate and fisheries at one end, you find that some species disappear, but that they'll have different peaks in that bioenergetic spectrum, and different gene forms will have those different peaks so that you can play out evolution. Next slide, please. And the way that you do that is you literally follow who survives being fed upon, who survives catching, who survives the effects of climate, to see their genes be passed on. So modelling evolution at ever finer resolution so that we can really understand the adaptive capacity of the ocean, how it will cope with climate change, and how we can help it along. Next slide, please. Now, we've done that historically for individual species and how they're connected to the habitat and up through fisheries, so that you play out history and then you look at different alternatives. So those 5 coloured bars are what would happen to that population under different management options. We can now do that at an ecosystem scale. Next slide, please. Next slide. Yeah, so in this one, you can see that the question is about how you look at those different perspectives. So on the left-hand side, it's a desirable future where we act to maintain biodiversity, the waters remain clear, there's good carbon drawdown, oxygen production, coastal protection through those habitats because it's very rich and biodiverse. We can compare that but with the world on the right-hand side there, which is much more disturbed. There's more frequent flooding, there's lower water quality, more microbial mats, and much less biodiversity, which is a pretty disturbing picture and one we'd probably want to stay away from. Next slide, please. So in summary, the ocean is a very rich but increasingly crowded space. There is a lot we still don't know about it. We just can't be everywhere and sample everything. So modelling is our powerful tool to bring together the information that we do have. It allows for current simple understanding of what we need on day-to-day operations and into the long term. It brings together information on how the oceans work. It can provide warnings about what's coming and what to avoid. But also it can let us test ideas and explore options about what we need. It's our eyes on the world. And what this coming decade will help us do is refine how we do that. So how we best model those different parts to understand the new processes that are happening in the climate change and anthropogenically influenced ocean. But it will also allow us to better connect with data. And we need more data to feed these models to make sure that they really are connecting well with the world, because we really need to make evidence-based decisions, because an evidence-based decision is a better decision. It's better than a blind stab in the dark. And it's really important for all of us around the world that we make good decisions because we're very dependent on the ocean. It is an ocean world and there's no way we can escape that. Thank you.
Beth, thank you so much for that insightful and detailed presentation and explaining to us what different models are out there and how they come to be and how we can use them for future predictions. I want to hand it over to our next and last keynote speaker of the day before we get into our two roundtables. The next keynote speaker is Katja Fennell. She is a professor and chair in the Department of Oceanography at Dalhousie University in Canada, and her keynote presentation will address linking ocean predictions with a healthy ocean. Please welcome Katja.
Thank you very much, Anne-Christine. I appreciate it. I want to start by thanking the organizers for the opportunity to present. Can I have the first slide, please? So I was asked to speak about the value of ocean predictions for a healthy ocean, and focus in particular on linking land and coastal oceans. Next slide. So just to set the stage briefly, what do we mean by ocean predictions and what is a healthy ocean? So when I hear ocean predictions, I immediately think of a very broad definition. And I'm not the only one, so a group of colleagues and we defined this formally in one of the community papers that came out of Ocean Ops 2019. And so basically, ocean predictions, in particular when we're thinking of biogeochemistry and ecosystems, includes climate projections, optimal hindcasts and reanalyses, short-term and seasonal forecasts, and scenarios. And in this presentation here, I will focus on scenarios in particular. And, you know, a healthy ocean might mean different things to different people too, although most of us will probably agree that it would be a well-oxygenated ocean that is not acidified, that is productive, but not overly eutrophied, and that has a high ecological diversity. And I will focus here on the first bullet of these four, well-oxygenated ocean, which it turns out in coastal oceans is tightly connected with not acidified conditions. Next, please. And I'm going to talk here about the Mississippi River as one example. There are many examples, but this happens to be the one that I'm familiar with. So the Mississippi River drainage basin is big and it collects a lot of anthropogenic man-made nutrients, both nitrate, phosphate, and a lot of those nutrients enter the coastal Gulf of Mexico and create a large hypoxic zone, also referred to as dead zone, every summer there. And so this is a concern, has been a concern to stakeholders and policymakers for quite a while. Next. And in fact, it has led to the creation of a task force that's an interagency, interstate entity. And this task force has put out a first action plan in 2001, in which they set out this goal that by the year 2015, the 5-year running average spatial extent of the hypoxic zone should be reduced to less than 5,000 square kilometers. It was about between 15 and 20,000 square kilometers at the time. And the best current science indicates a 30% reduction in nitrogen discharges is consistent with this goal. So I don't know on what science this was based, and I'll show you in the next few minutes that it probably wasn't the best. So the plot that just popped up there in the bottom shows the evolution of nutrient loads from the 1980s to present, both nitrate in blue and phosphate in red. There's a bit of interannual variability because of drought years and flood years, but basically nutrient inputs have not decreased. Next. And also now the gray bars show the hypoxic extent measured during one cruise midsummer every year. The hypoxic extent also has not decreased. So this action plan goal has not been reached. Okay, next. So let's talk now about how the predicted ocean comes in here. So this is an animation from a hypoxia model that my group has developed for the region. And so the surface at the top there, this tilted surface that you see, that is an animation of sea surface salinity, where dark blues refer to fresh water, which is nutrient rich. And then the colorful panels below show oxygen concentrations. And red colors mean hypoxic conditions. You can see, or you saw how in the middle of the summer, it was basically spreading there over a large region. This wrapped surface there is the bottom oxygen concentration, and then the two vertical slices, those are vertical cross sections. So this is the model that we've extensively validated against all kinds of observations that were available to us, and we've developed a certain degree of confidence that we can use this to understand how the system works and also how it responds to different nutrient inputs. So we've used this to conduct a lot of scenario simulations where we basically systematically reduced nitrate and phosphate inputs and then investigated the effects on the hypoxic conditions. Next. And so this is a slide that summarizes the most important results. So first, these 4 panels here show the same snapshot in time from 4 different scenario simulations. The top left is what we get for current loads, and this is just happens to be summer 2009, doesn't matter really which one I pick. The top, and you see the extensive hypoxic zone there. The top right shows what the model predicts we would get if phosphate load was reduced by 60%. The bottom left shows the effect of a 60% reduction in nitrogen load, and the bottom right a 60% reduction in both nitrogen and phosphorus load. So if we work out the math, it turns out that to reach this action plan goal of an average hypoxic size of 5,000 square kilometers, a 63% reduction in N load or a 58% reduction in NNP load is required. So these are significant nutrient load reductions that are hard to accomplish in the watershed, and they're significantly larger than what the original action plan had assumed. Next. So just to remind you, this is again repeating that that initial goal and assumption. Next. But of course, results from our model and other colleagues' models quickly showed that this was not a realistic goal, right? That a 30% reduction would accomplish this. So the 2013 reassessment then called for a decrease in scientific uncertainty of nitrogen and phosphorus effects on hypoxia. Next. And the 2015 reassessment of the original action plan Of course, 2015 was the timeline that they had set for reaching this goal, and I showed you already early on that this was not the case. So this new reissued plan retained the goal of achieving a 5,000 square kilometer average size, but pushed it further into the future, 2035, and set this interim target of a 20% nutrient load reduction by 2025, which will allow us to actually observe what true reduction we get in hypoxic size for this nutrient load reduction. Okay, next. So that was one example. Now, of course, there are hypoxic areas around the globe. Many of them have hypoxic conditions that are due at least partly to man-made influences. Next. The same processes are basically occurring in all of these systems, but the relative importance varies depending on which system you look at. It's strongly dependent on the regional characteristics. Next. But there are some commonalities, right? So some systems are upwelling shelves where we don't have any major rivers, low oxygen is naturally driven. Next. Some systems are dominated by big rivers, and there the low oxygen is often anthropogenically driven. Next. And then there are retentive systems where water renewal takes a long time. They are naturally prone to hypoxic conditions, and there the degree of anthropogenic influence varies. Next. And so even though there's this big diversity across systems, there are some underlying general principles that we can use to infer and understand and get cross-system insight into what process is important. And I don't have time to explain the details right now, but if you're curious, you can read up on it. Next. And so, of course, the models can also be used to project into the future. And so here's another example now for the Northern Gulf of Mexico. This is comparing present conditions, bottom water pH and oxygen on the left to future projected 2100 conditions in pH and oxygen. First thing to notice is that low oxygen conditions do coincide with acidified waters, low pH. And of course, in the future, hypoxia tends to become, or is projected to become, more severe and expand in size somewhat. And of course, acidification is going to get a lot worse. Next. So I hope I've given you sort of a glimpse of the value that scenario simulations, just one aspect of a predicted ocean, can provide for devising sound management policies and also managing expectations as to what can be expected. And so the three key recommendations that I would like to leave you with is the importance of an expanded and sustained system for biogeochemical measurement capabilities as part of the global ocean observing system, and especially autonomous platforms, gliders and floats, will play an increasingly important role. It's important to expand and sustain those capabilities. Second, I want to advocate that we facilitate free and easy access to observations, the FAIR principles that have been articulated by many. And so Argo is one of the sort of poster childs for excellent international coordination and sharing of data. Ocean Sites is another one. There are many others. I'm sure we can also think of examples where it doesn't work so well. And I would expand or include in this not only observations, but also model codes. It's important we share model codes and model data sets freely and openly and make them easily accessible. And last but not least, I want to make a pitch for multi-pronged approaches to interactions between the producers of ocean predictions, that includes operational centers, academic researchers, and the users. There should be a push and pull on many levels, right? Creators should push their products out there for everybody to see and be aware. And users should exert pull on what they need, what would help to address the specific issues they have. And with that, I will conclude. And back to you, Anne-Christine.
Thank you so much for that presentation and for giving us such a detailed overview. I want to at this point bring back all of the keynote speakers, and I have one quick question before we are moving on, and that is, could you quickly summarize in 1 or 2 sentences what the most significant societal impacts are of the topics that you talked about, so ocean acidification, ecosystem impacts and changes with global climate change, and oxygen minimum zones? Maybe I'll hand it over to Janice and Leticia first.
Okay, Janice, do you want to start or should I?
You can go ahead, yes.
Okay.
Be my guest.
Okay. Yeah, so it's very important that we keep in mind, and I showed you one of the IPCC main findings from this the 6th report. The changes that are already happening in the planet and in the ocean, and what concerns ocean acidification, we won't be able to revert them on a lifetime of a human life. When 2100, we still have acidification. The very important message is that we have to reduce CO2 emissions to the atmosphere so that we can stabilize climate, and then deoxygenation, and also all the impacts on biodiversity and the marine ecosystems, coastal, open ocean. I mean, we will have less impact on them. I guess that's one of the main, and this comes with integration of observation modeling, and the fair data principle. That's also very important. And yeah, I guess that's it. I'm happy to answer other questions that may come out later as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Do you have anything to add, Janice?
Yes, maybe what I deem important for us is to be able to bring information from society into our plate, so as to start on a feedback system and make them understand what our worries are. And they would most certainly be able to convert their worries into studies that we would like to have carried out and delivered as our knowledge to them. What I find is that we are normally so much enclosed in our own shelves that we are not being able to address those matters properly, and this makes a big difference, and we should work on that. I'm not talking about ocean literacy per se, but the whole suite of actions that we have to bring to our plate and carry on with our research.
Thank you so much, and I think that's the key component of the decade. So hopefully we can achieve that in the next 10 years and make sure that we incorporate all of those suggestions. Beth, over to you.
So for me, it's many of the same things. It's information sharing of all kinds, both observations, traditional knowledge, local knowledge, and model predictions all working together to really understand what's happening with the living part of the ocean, because it's actually what makes the planet habitable. So we need to have a really good understanding of what we can safely take from the oceans in terms of catch and other kinds of activities, and what it can give back to us in terms of climate regulation, coastal protection, and the many other services it generates. We really do need to live together, both as a human whole in our interactions with that knowledge, but also with the ocean whole, and really respect that it is an ocean planet.
Thank you so much, Beth. Over to you, Katja.
Yeah, so I agree with everything that's been said, and maybe I will sort of make one additional point. And I think Janice has already made it in her presentation. We've sort of become accustomed to the services the ocean provides and taking them for granted, including the uptake of anthropogenic CO2. But that's not going to continue. The ocean will actually eventually turn into a source of CO2 in the ocean. Many nations now are actively working toward net zero carbon policies, which is great and laudable. It's important to consider the ocean and the sort of the changes in air sea net flux that are in store for us, consider those. And so I have a feeling that this message is not yet heard to the degree that it should by the decision makers and policy makers. So we have an important job to do there.
Thank you so much. I agree. We have quite a task ahead of us, but I'm positive that we can achieve it, especially with such a great group of experts participating in these events and educating everyone. I want to, at this point, thank all of the keynote speakers from the first session for their great presentations and, of course, their time. I know time zones are very variable for everyone. So thank you so much for being here, and I'm handing it back to Monica in the studio.
Well, thank you so much, Anne-Catherine, and thank you so much to your fantastic panel, all those keynote speakers, including the uninvited guest, that rooster that seems to passionately say hello to a new morning down under, the voice of nature firsthand. So thank you to all of you. And before we start with the first of two round tables, I think it's time for a very, very short breather. So we take a very short break, 5 minutes. Don't go too far. See you then. Welcome back to part 3 of our second Ocean Decade Laboratory, a predicted ocean, which takes us now from observations to predictions. The next panel, or rather round table, will address various aspects of the current observing value chain, as well as current prediction capabilities. And there is one very big question. How can we work towards implementing the concept of an integrated global observing system, serving many users, including with local enhancements down to the coastal level? Big question indeed, but then again, this is a big panel, a high-level round table. And the discussion will be steered by Roshan Ramesour. He's Associate Professor at the Ocean Foundation, Mauritius. Roshan, over to you.
Thank you, Monica. It's a pleasure to have our 5 panelists today to discuss observations to predictions. Very high-level experts in the field, and we will, without further ado, I'll probably pass on to our first panelist, Ramasamy Venkatasan. He's the head observation, National Institute of Ocean Technology, Chennai, India. And he will try to establish and talk about maintaining observing systems from physics to biology, from global to coastal, including governance aspects. Now to you, Ramasamy. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Roshan. Thank you very much. It is a great opportunity for me to present here. It's all known that the ocean is very important, and observing the ocean, as we see more and more, it's a paramount important for the life of the people and the activities what we do. So here comes the importance of observing the ocean from the physics to the biology, where the goose has been propagating the idea of having the essential ocean variable, and wherein the observation need to start from the coast to the open ocean and thereon therefore. And the importance of the observations has been very validly known, and the WMO under the Infocom has been propagating global ocean observing system, wherein ocean plays a major role. So with this opportunity, I am sure that we all will be taking forward the effort, because maintaining or sustaining the ocean observation system is very complex, requiring capacity building, and having the observation, the EEZ is very important, where the individual countries need to have the observation and provide that. So it's all known that any small amount of data you contribute, that increases the prediction capability. So we need to look for a newer opportunity, newer observation tool, newer autonomous observation system, wherein we are able to cover and expand. By the end of this decade, we will be having more amount of observation tools that will be useful for our prediction and understanding about it. Here, indigenous knowledge of the people, as well as the citizen scientists, all need to play a major role to have this observation to be carried out in the days to come. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Venkat. Very nice highlight about the work you're doing. And I'll move on to our next panelist, Pierre Baruel, the CEO of Mercator Ocean International. And he will talk about the development and maintenance of modeling and data assimilation infrastructure. To you, Pierre. Thank you.
Thank you, and hello, everyone. It is impressive where we are with ocean prediction today. We master complex system combining satellite in situ models. We are covering the global ocean, regional seas. We are managing physics, biochemistry, ice. We have thousands of users that trust us, and this trust is extremely valuable. So we can be proud also of our cooperation. But there is something that is very specific that I would like to highlight with you, is the fact that we are able to turn innovation and science into operations and services. And this is something very important, and this is something we are doing very well. Maintain state-of-the-art our operational systems, properly balance the science push and user pull, and this is very, very, very strong and very critical for our future. So now we feel that we can do more and better. I'm thinking about coastal, I'm turning seriously in the game. I'm talking about AI, big data, digital twins that are game changers. I'm talking about climate and biodiversity coming together. And this program that are Coast Predict, DITO, 4C, Upscoded, and to name a few, are very, very, very important. My recommendation is really to deal with this research to operation as a pivotal role since the very beginning, to adopt a cross-cutting approach, to make sure that we will set up the standards, the common, everything that we need to prepare the legacy for the operations and services. And my personal effort, with discussion with Vladimir Yabilin and IOC, is to set up a decade collaborative center for this, dedicated to ocean predictions, to prepare this with the program leaders. And we will prepare this also with Craig and Detlef after this laboratory event. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pierre, for highlighting the technological infrastructure which is required. I mean, very impressive and intensive work ahead. So our next panelist, hopefully Emma Heslop, program specialist at IOC UNESCO, talking about the co-design of observing and prediction systems. To you, Emma, hopefully we have her online. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much, Roshan. I hope you agree. So yes, I work out with GOOS, the Global Ocean. But before making a change in geography, I came from a business and GOOS 3 years ago, I shown the framework ocean observing BOO and seeing a sort of a smallish feedback loop across that diagram, and thinking perhaps this was an area that needed some more work. It was signaled as one and dynamic to play for users and providers, which is what people are thinking about throughout oceans. There are successful examples of connection between observations and use, the service prediction, even reducing whale stress, etc. But not really a consistent, systematic approach. Observations can support as many applications as well. And what was the use of that? Now, GOOS looked on this program, Ocean Observing Co-Design, to tackle this work, to improve observing design, service delivery, and to form investment decisions. We have the building blocks, and listening to people today really, reinforces that. I need to do now to really engage in making these building blocks work all the way along the value chain and along many value chains. And for me, co-design, the modelling and assessment community, stakeholders, specific areas. By the end of the decade, and these activities are not interconnected, we really build connection will be the delivery capacity of both activities. Observing design will use for government or forecasting for national forecasts, connect with these areas if they exist, with the observing community to what's in plan, what's in it, and then with the modelling and community where we will get the best value from the observations, these use area needs. And so this key will be to assess the system from different use perspectives, and for this an infrastructure will need to be developed to enable to assess the low and levels. So, I think in the future this will kind of perhaps even merge some of these digital twin ideas, perhaps even providing kind of dynamic and
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Emma. I mean, I think your time is running out, and it's been a very interesting topic that you are talking, very challenging times ahead for us. I mean, trying to go design in terms of data assimilation, in terms of trying to get all the technological equipment in terms of computing powers and so on. So very interesting. So without further ado, I'll probably move to the next panelist, Hervé Lamian, Team Leader, Pacific Community. Up to you now to talk about development of ocean prediction capabilities, short-term to seasonal, decadal, climate, global to coastal, including coupling with land, physics to biogeochemistry and biology. Up to you, Hervé. Thank you.
Bulavinaka and greetings from Fiji. I am truly humbled to be part of this event, and today I would like to share some thoughts around the challenges and opportunities we must seize across the Pacific region to truly transform our ocean prediction capabilities. Did you know that the Pacific region is 98% ocean? So here we pretty much live in an ocean continent. But our islands face many challenges when it comes to building and sustaining ocean prediction capacity. from data scarcity to our small population, which limits our national capacities. These challenges lead us to mostly rely on global ocean prediction products that are too costly to adequately resolve our small islands. So we have a critical need to transform the wealth of information provided by these global products into local impact, so that communities and emergency response agencies can take on-the-ground life-saving actions. Similarly, we need to increase our localized risk knowledge to inform tailored and long-term adaptation solutions in the face of climate change and preserve the Pacific way of life. There is great and exciting work happening across our region. At least our team gets really excited about it. Working together with weather services, disaster offices across the Pacific region, developing models to inform evacuation plans, deploying instruments in locations where we never had any systematic monitoring before, developing tailored forecast systems and decision support tools. But we are looking for this decade to expand it. The Ocean Decade must help us foster genuine and meaningful partnership at all levels, local, regional, and international level. We need international cooperation with an equal will to share and learn to develop localized solutions and approaches together, a truly transformative partnership that makes us progress as one. Thank you.
Thank you, Hervé. Well, it's been a very good talk about the community in the Pacific Ocean states, the island community, the vulnerability which you're facing in these times where we're having a number of climate change issues and so on. I mean, very interesting to have a case study on that. And hopefully we come out with certain solutions. So thank you very much. And I'll move on to our next panelist, Mujib Latif, Head of Marine Meteorology Unit at GeoMar, and his talk will be talking about limits of predictability. Thank you. To you, Mujib.
Yeah, thanks a lot, and hello, everybody. I'm working now for about 40 years in the field of ocean prediction, climate prediction, and we have come a long way from the first monthly to seasonal predictions to decadal prediction. And there are, and I would like to highlight this, also limits to predictability. I mean, if we consider internal variability, for instance, which is due to the chaotic nature of the climate system, then of course there is a lack of data that limits predictability. There is model bias that also limits predictability. And of course, I mean that there is the unpredictable nonlinear component of climate variability that per se is unpredictable. Okay, and we should always keep this in mind, that there is a certain degree of unpredictability in the climate and in the biogeochemical system. And then when it comes to projections, global change projections, then there is one uncertainty that we have to cope with, which won't go away. And this is what we refer to as the scenario uncertainty. So even if we have perfect data, even if we would have perfect models, what we don't know is how mankind will behave in the future. Okay, and so global change predictions are projections, as we say, because they are not really predictions. They are conditional predictions. So we assume, for instance, that carbon dioxide will further or will continue to increase in the atmosphere, and then calculate what the influence of this increase in greenhouse gas concentrations may be. And then we can also calculate another scenario. And so there will be a wide range of possible futures. Okay, and so we have to cope with this societally, because this uncertainty is inherent to the climate and biogeochemistry projection. So I leave it at that, and I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Mujib. I mean, very highlighting the unpredictability. Obviously, there's always probability of things happening, various scenarios which have to be developed. Based on observations, whether it's a resolution, what type of resolution we're talking, whether the climate type data and so on. Obviously, lots to look into, and thank you for your excellent highlight on this topic. So, further ado, we'll probably move on to the question and answers panel and so on. So, I'll probably have a few questions for you, the panelists. And maybe you'll try to answer, give your opinion or give your feedback on some of the questions. I'll move to one of my questions here. How can we translate forecast warnings or data outputs into more of an impact-based information system? Example, 2-meter swell of coast, what is the impact on the land? So up to you. The floor is open to you now. Thank you. Anyone wants to answer the question?
I can say maybe, yeah, please go ahead.
No, Venkat, please go ahead.
No, you please go ahead, Per. You are the right person for it offs. Yeah.
Well, what I would like to say is something about the interconnection of what we are doing ourselves as ocean prediction providers and what the users or what they are doing themselves, and the need to think about interconnected systems. I don't think that we will be able to give all the information they need to use, but I think we should invite the user system into our chains, and this is exactly what the digital twins are about. And we need to think and design something a bit different from what we are doing today, which is a system where we have all the systems that are interconnected, and the impact is directly measured by this system, but because they can read directly into our system on our data. So the value chain is continuous, and when you change something in the observation network, it does impact what the model are delivering, which will impact the product, that will impact the coastal system, etc., until I don't know the old drift shift system or this kind of stuff. And I think we need to think about the future with the different modules that are interconnected, so that we can really allow this information and bring this information to the user.
Okay, thank you. Any further comments on the floor?
Yeah, I agree with Pierre. Yes, brought up a very interesting point. What we want to say is that in the last 1 decade, the connecting to the different agencies and experts have come together in the case of GOOS as well as in the WMO, where they are talking about Earth system approach. All these information, what you have asked, is being addressed now when you encompass whole physics or biology or chemistry together in an Earth interaction, which is so complex. And the advancement of technology and the new observation tools and the computing facilities making us with AI and ML to make us to understand. I'm sure that in the days to come, maybe the decades later, your point will be well addressed. It's not only for the prediction of climate change alone, it could be for biodiversity or many more activities. That is what we are expecting in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Maybe I'll try to ask Monica whether we have any question from the audience. Maybe I have another couple of questions, but I prefer to ask her if she has got any questions. Up to you, Monica, right?
Yeah, thank you, Rajan, and thank you first of all to this really fascinating roundtable. And indeed, I have 2 questions here, and I just basically start with the one right on the top. It's a question for Mojib Latif, who in his intervention talked about a scenario of uncertainty because we don't know how mankind will behave in the future. From what we know now, how well do our models represent the current increase in extreme marine heat waves? Are we prepared for more once-in-a-century extreme events? That's a question for Mojib Latif.
Yeah, okay. I think in general terms, the climate models are doing quite well. And I mean, there's always this discussion about, especially from the skeptic side, whether or not the models are trustworthy. And actually they are trustworthy because you can compare actually the predictions or projections that have been made several decades ago, more than 30 years ago, and compare those with the trends that we have observed over the last 30 years. And they agree pretty well with the observations. And so I think climate models have come a long way, and they are able to simulate realistically certain aspects, including marine heat waves. But of course, we are limited by resolution. So we don't have the computer power that we wish to have. And so we still need to work on some downscaling strategies to get from the global to the regional and down to the local scale.
All right. Well, thank you so much for that. And as people are starting now to send even more questions, Roshan, if it's okay, I just have one more for Emma.
Yeah, yes, fine.
I hope Emma is still with us, because the connection was somewhat tricky before. But Emma, if you still hear me, let's jump to the year 2030. What will be reached by the UN Ocean Decade with respect to a predicted ocean in a best case scenario? 2030.
Right. Okay. Well, I hope you can hear me now, and that's a super big question. I really would hope that on the major societal challenges that perhaps facing us around things like the carbon budget, around predicting extreme weather events more broadly, also around, with the need in the coastal zone. We've really taken
we're losing you. We're losing you, Emma, I'm afraid. It started off very promising, but we're losing you at this moment. Don't know if you're moving within the room, but we lost the connection. Roshan, do you wanna try again?
You have any further questions?
Yes, they're coming in now.
Yes.
But I don't want to step on your toes, but I'm happy to move on, because there's a fresh one coming in just now. So I read it just as it's down here. Lots of mentions of the value chain of ocean knowledge today, but I'd suggest we need to reorient to consider the ecosystem of ocean knowledge, which shares in many directions. So that is not a question, that is a statement which you can agree or disagree with. And the rest is still working. So unless somebody wants to comment that statement, Roshan, I would give the floor back to you.
Okay, thank you. So I invite comments. Do you have any further comments? Or maybe move on to another question you want. Yeah, let us go to a question. Well, is there a mechanism where impact-based observations can be assessed and validated with the model that is being put forward? Open to the floor. Yep.
Yeah, I'm playing with the light. If I don't move, then the light is off, so I have to move from time to time. I fully agree with what was said about the value chain and the ecosystem. I mean, this is completely clear. We have something like a linear value chain, observations, then model, then products, then users. This is, okay, this is not anymore the case, and we need to think about it, different knowledge, interconnected, and play with this complexity. And about your last question, this is exactly where I was going. We must be very innovative, and this is great to see what the UN Decade has already achieved. I mean, to create this great movement for innovation in the different programs. And we must be organized for what you were mentioning, to have standards, to have a command that will serve all together, that we will define all together, to make sure that we are interconnected, that we are working for the first things, and that we are sharing the best practices together. So standards, KPI, all the indicators that are useful to assess the value of what we are doing, and that are useful for the others to play with our data or our knowledge. So we should not neglect this part. This is where we will be strong and fully organized, and this is where we will be able to feel that purpose, which is really to create value for what we have in mind. I mean, create knowledge, create economy, create education. We need to be very, very well organized with standards, KPI, these kind of things.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. Thank
Yeah.
you for that. Just to keep you up to speed, we have about 3 minutes. I think that's enough time for one really big question and answer still.
Okay. So I would like to ask you, I mean, how can the UN Decade facilitate the success of products and services that meet user needs, and how to monitor that what they deliver is useful and impactful, especially when we're talking about disparity between different countries, right? I mean, some countries have technology, high-speed internet, others have gaps. I mean, what's your views on this? Any comments on how we're going to proceed? Thank you.
I mean, we share one world and we should share all the data. I mean, I think it's most important that we actually support international collaboration as much as we can, because if we deal with the ocean, you can't explore the ocean nationally, you can do it only internationally. And there are still some obstacles that data are not shared and so on. And I think we can do much better in sharing data.
Yeah. I will add here that today the success of many of the observation and forecasts is mainly because of sharing of the data. We have seen the international program where the data sets are freely shared, and that gave us a wide, broad dividends, and that product should be really being used in many countries. I'm sure that this point is well taken, and we all look forward in the days to come to share the data and whatever we have. Any amount of information you have, that helps you in a better prediction, so that we are serving to the society. The whole aim is serving to the society and the mankind. Thank you.
Well, brilliant.
Thank you, Venkat.
May I make a small comment, please?
Yeah,
Hervé speaking here.
yeah.
Sorry, you
Yes,
can't see me on the. Yeah. Thank you. I would say that to ensure that the service is really tailored to the user need, one of the first steps is really to take time to really understand the perception of our user and do a user need assessment, and then create a partnership with our users so we can create a feedback loop between the forecast that's created and what's actually happening on the ground. And without that partnership with various sectors, for example, utilities, etc., or with the coastal communities, to really have a meaningful partnership that creates that feedback loop and help us improve those forecasts, and then we would be missing the point. And maybe another thing to maybe say is, over this decade, our user needs will change. So doing one need assessment today will probably not be adequate to provide a service for the next 10 years. Those kind of system or our approaches and processes need to happen routinely to ensure that our services are always timely and tailored to our users. Thank you.
Thank you so much for this point. And sadly, with an eye on the clock, I would give the final word to Roshan to basically close this roundtable.
Okay, I would like very much to thank our panelists for their very thoughtful and very intensive ideas about what is going to happen in the next few decades. I mean, these are challenging times for everyone, especially during the climate change and UN Ocean Decade. I mean, how we're going to harness the ocean in terms of data and so on, how we're going to predict things, and using technology as well. I mean, I know Venkat is very involved with IEEE and so on, with the marine science technology aspects. I mean, Pierre and everyone. I mean, these are things that will probably enhance a better understanding of the oceans and how it's going to affect humanity in the coming years. Without further ado, I'll probably pass on to Monica, probably to close the roundtable. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much, Roshan. And again, a big thank you to all the panelists of this round table. Of course, we can only scratch the surface in this short period of time, but there was a lot of food for thought there that you gave us. Certainly for the next break, because it's time for the final, very short break before we enter the fourth and final round table of this second Ocean Decade Laboratory. 5 minutes from now, fresh air, cup of tea, and then see you again. And welcome back to the fourth and final part of this second Ocean Decade Laboratory, focusing on the decade outcome, a predicted ocean. Now, this second and final roundtable for today is entitled Ensure an Impactful Predicted Ocean. Now, as you know, a key component of the decade is the connection of stakeholder and end user. We've heard that several times already in the last 3 hours. And this round table is asking a very important question. How can we connect to stakeholder and user communities to understand and respond to the needs of end users all the way down to community level by developing a deeper understanding of regional issues and building partnerships across the value chain? And who are the user groups actually that are using the data for products and services? I think these are questions worth asking, and I'm very happy to hand over to the session chair, because the discussion will be steered by George Petakis. He is a research director at the Hellenic Center for Marine Research in Greece. George, there you are. Over to you. And we cannot hear you. Is your microphone activated? I'm doing lip reading right now. Still lip reading. But you can hear me, right? If you do not. Yes, you can hear me. We can't hear you. What are we going to do about it? Okay, I just hear in the background that we try to solve the problem for you. Maybe it's on our side. I wish I could press a button and everything is okay. Unfortunately, I'm not in that position. I can see on my preview screen the panelists already, so thank you very much for being here, and please just bear with us until I know how we proceed. And while our technical side is trying to get George back, I'm just moving out of the picture and let Detlef, our co-chair, come into this position, because maybe he can already kick off the round table. I'm sure he's capable. Detlef, here you are.
Well, Monica, thank you very much. This is actually, I was trying to whisper in her ear to call for Derek Snowden, and so that, I guess, is a response that I have to do it. Thank you very much. I think while we're actually trying to solve this technical problem, I really would like to introduce Derek Snowden. He's from the US Integrated Ocean Observing System Office of NOAA, and very much involved in data and the whole prediction system. So Derek, please go ahead, and his topic is actually data and product management and services, very much to the question. And Derek, over to you. And I hope once you're done that actually the moderator is back online.
With the technical challenges. Yeah, as Detlef mentioned, my name is Derek Snowden, and I'm from the U.S. Integrated Ocean Observing System at NOAA. Our program supports and collaborates with 11 regional networks to collect ocean information and deliver information products from them. And one of the strategies that I use in order to deal with the large stakeholder group that we have is to really focus on data management and dissemination from across the enterprise to reach as many stakeholders as we can. And many of the colleagues that here on the panel have deep experience reaching that end user that we've been talking a lot about in the first 3 hours. And I'm going to focus a little bit earlier on in the value chain and concentrate on the people who are generating the information, generating these end user products based on a rawer form of the information, basic observations or predictions, and then they add value by creating synthesized products. And those synthesized products are what the end users really need. But this intermediary group, these are scientists, software and product developers, and government, academia, and even the private sector. And this group differs from the end users a little bit in that they really need access to large volumes of heterogeneous data. This is the big data problem that you hear a lot about. Whereas the end users, they typically just want something a little more succinct and targeted to their specific decision, right? They're trying to make a decision as part of their daily lives, and they don't have the time or the expertise to sift through enormous amounts of data. So this different intermediate stakeholder group, they're successful when they can really accelerate scientific interpretation, and rapidly generate decision support tools based on that science. So I hope we get a chance to dive into this a little bit more in the Q&A, but until then, I'd like to draw your attention to 3 satellite events that are really exploring different aspects of this and have different takes on the answers. In particular, Open Ocean Cloud is thinking about how to utilize the commercial cloud providers to accelerate science by changing the way scientists interact with data. Bringing the calculation to the data instead of bringing the data to the calculation is a phrase you'll hear them talk about, and they want you to think about what that means for you. Also, the IHO S100 satellite and the OpenGTS satellite event are both exploring different ways to bring observations to users across the value chain. And they represent 2 good examples of how different communities think of standards differently. And the implication is there's no one-size-fits-all solution. So with that teaser, I'll hand it back to you, George or Detlef.
who is standing here in Berlin now, but that's all okay. And I, first of all, thank you very much, Derek. And I just want to point out, I have all the papers here now, so I could take over from you, George, but I hear that you can hear us and we can hear you. So here we go. Take over, please.
Excellent. Thanks, Monica. Hello from Greece, finally. And welcome to this last roundtable. So let's not waste any more time, and let's continue with Marjolaine Krug. Marjolaine is a senior scientific advisor at the National Oceans and Coastal Information Management System in the Department of Forestry, Fisheries and the Environment in South Africa. Marjolaine, please.
Yes, hi everybody. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. What I wanted to say is that if we look at integrated observing and modeling systems around the world, the mature systems that are existing, they're to a large extent funded by government. And while sustained government and high-level funding is essential to ensure cohesion of the system and benefits extending beyond the industry sector, changes in government strategy, funding and policy can also put strain on the observing system and the operational services delivered. So I feel that there needs to be a greater contribution from industry, and some of the benefits derived by industry need to be fed back towards maintaining the system and much-rich communities who depend on the ocean environment and its resources for survival. At present, many observing systems have established links to their primary users, generally located in government or across science groups, but few are able to account for their end-user groups, and more resources must be allocated towards stakeholders' engagement and communication and planned in the design of the system from its conception and onwards. And to be able to account for end users will also help in ensuring a fit-for-purpose system and in assessing the true value of the predicted ocean. So society also needs accountability, and to ensure that society can benefit from a predicted ocean, we must also promote civil society participation and interactions. And just to conclude on the points that I wanted to talk about here on what the society needs, I think the COVID pandemic has demonstrated that we live in a connected system and that we can't continue to operate in our bubble. And there are regional differences in our ability to observe, monitor, and protect the ocean. And we need to increase our observing and monitoring efforts in key regions of the world which are undersampled and not sampled at all, and to provide more support to underdeveloped or low-income countries. Thank you.
Thank you, Marjolaine. And I think I fully share that small capacity on ocean observing in lower income countries can be a significant barrier that we need to overcome, and that it's extremely significant that we actually engage stakeholders and users right from the beginning. Thank you. So I then move to the third panelist, Melissa Iwamoto. Melissa is Director and Principal Investigator for the Pacific Islands Ocean Observing System in the US. Melissa?
Aloha. Again, I'm Melissa Iwamoto, and I am a grateful settler on this Aina, and have called Hawaii home for almost 20 years now. I would like to begin by acknowledging that the Aina on which I live and work were yielded by Queen Liliuokalani under duress and protest to the United States to avoid the bloodshed of her people. I am here today as Director of the Pacific Islands Ocean Observing System, also known as PAC-IUS, which serves the US-affiliated Pacific Islands. We are one of the 11 regional components feeding into the US Integrated Ocean Observing System that Derek is part of. At PAC-IUS, we believe that coastal and ocean data and information save lives and protect livelihoods and resources. We aim to empower our users by providing accurate and reliable coastal and ocean information, tools, and services that are easy to use and easy to access. So the question for us then is, how do we ensure that the data and information that we provide address this mission? How do we know what our users need so that we may meet their requirements? First, we recognize that more coastal and ocean data do not automatically translate into benefits for society, or more specifically for our users. Similar to many other regional systems in IUS and elsewhere, we follow what some of my colleagues and I have articulated as a three-step process. And for more details on this process, there's a slide with the graphic illustrating it and a citation for our paper in the Ocean Library for this laboratory. The first of these steps is to tailor engagement to identify user needs. And this is truly the foundation, and we've been hearing more and more of this, and especially today. The key is the intent to be user-driven and to build relationships. The second step of this process is to design and refine data products with the users. And the third step is to have iterative or ongoing engagement with users. This is about long-term relationships with users to be able to evolve with them and their needs.
Thank you, Melissa. And if I may say so, that this iterative engagement with the users is the only way if we want to maximize efficiency. And it's a very important step. Our next panelist is Molly Power-Stora. Molly is acting team leader of ocean management and literacy in the Pacific community in Fiji. Molly? We cannot hear you, Molly. It seems that you're muted.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, yes. Yes.
Great, thank you. Sorry for that. Nizam Bulavanaka and warm greetings from Fiji. It's great to be here today and to have the chance to talk about what I consider to be the essential issue when we consider the ultimate aim of the decade, and that's improving engagement with user groups. But how do we do it? I'll start with a personal story. So when I first arrived in Fiji as a Peace Corps volunteer more than 15 years ago now, I was eager to share my knowledge and energy with the rural island community where I was assigned to live and work for 2 years. But I learned an important lesson about community engagement then that still informs the work I do today. And the idea is simple. We build trust over time. We talk less and listen more. We participate in what's going on and wait to see how you can add in or help. And I learned the hard way not to try and steamroll my community with a fantastic solution that would solve their problems. They have the solutions. My task was to help make connections, remove barriers, encourage local innovators, and to learn. And indeed, I often say I learned more from my Peace Corps experience than I could ever give the community that hosted me in return. So whether you're engaging a community or a business association or an agency in your own country or another halfway around the world, this approach applies. And unfortunately, this approach can conflict with the short time frames and the outcome-driven expectations we see today in many development projects and research grants. But this is a challenge we need to overcome if we want the decade to be truly transformational. Real, sustainable change comes from within. This decade is for ocean science for sustainable development. And we hope that developing nations like Fiji and others across the Pacific will not be the passive beneficiaries of new models and research, but we will be in a position to drive Pacific-owned and Pacific-led ocean science. And to do that, we need to break down this idea that information flows in a one-way channel from observations to predictions to users. We need to recognize the value of the ecosystem of knowledge around us, which includes traditional and indigenous knowledge. And importantly, if there are sea level predictions or information we consider important for indigenous coastal communities, we need to be as willing to listen as we are eager to share. And if you'd like to learn more about how much of this is already happening and all the great work in the Pacific and some of our plans for the future, I warmly invite you to join the Pacific Islands Predicted Ocean Satellite Laboratory, the Wakamoana, weaving traditional knowledge and modern science to understand current and future ocean conditions, which begins directly after this event. And thank you.
Thank you, Molly. And if I can highlight here your words, talk less, listen more, and be as willing to listen as we are eager to share. Thanks. And we move from Fiji to Italy, and our final panelist is Nadia Pinardi. Nadia is professor at Alma Mater Studiorum at the University of Bologna in Italy. Nadia, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I'd like to start the discussion in this session about another point, even though I agree fully with all the points given before. I'm adding one more. I think the decade should do transformative science, and for the users, and for having more societal benefit and support to sustainable development goals. So if I look at predictions, where we have seen already the development of quite complete system that goes from observations to forecast and to customize the products for different users. I had to say I could find two major gaps, which requires that transformative science to give answers during the decade. The first one is the coastal. And the coastal, and in particular in the coastal impact-based forecasting, because that's what the user really care about. And that is a quite novel problem for the global coastal ocean. And I think that the decade can give a contribution to that. We also need, furthermore, to have coupled atmosphere hydrology, ocean ecosystem, coastal predictions and projections. We are still at the infancy of that part, because only now IPCC models have reached a sufficient resolution to give some downscaling capability. But to the coast, this is really rare, and we have to develop. So I conclude by saying that also we need always to consider accessibility, readiness of the products, and data policy visibility. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nadia. I think you raised very important issues here, and I think we all agree that the decade gives a wonderful opportunity to achieve results and to significantly advance on the challenges like the ones you highlighted. It's time to move now to the question part of the round table, and in order to give some time to the audience to send their question, I could go on asking the panelists with a question that I have prepared here. It's a rather general, and it's all about how can the UN decade facilitate the identification of the user groups that are using the data for products and services and ensure the need. In other words, how to identify our users and how to ensure the need, the user requirement. Anyone who would like to respond to this?
I can respond, George.
Yes, go on, please.
Thanks, George. It's a great question. And maybe to flow on a little bit from things that I said, and I think Melissa said as well, end users have needs, and we really need to understand those needs and to work collaboratively in sort of co-design to reach these tailored solutions. I've been hearing a lot of the word co-design, which gives me a lot of hope. I've also been hearing a lot of value chain, and I want to push back a little bit against that. I think we need to reorient ourselves to recognize the value of the ecosystem of knowledge. So the idea that the ship captain can contribute valuable in situ observations that can validate a forecast, or that a pearl farmer's years of experience responding to ENSO can provide valuable insights and trends. And indeed, we find in our work in the Pacific that we rely very heavily on in situ observations and personal observations on the ground to inform storm surge models and a lot of the work that we do. So I think the main point there, or the main answer there, is to take the extra effort to reach out to those communities. And as Melissa said, to really show the intent to do the extra work it takes to get that co-design, because it'll improve the end-use product and the usability of it as well.
Thank you, Molly. Anybody else who would like to? Yes, Melissa, you are muted.
Sure. Oh, am I?
Yes, now you are all right. Now we can hear you.
Okay. Thanks. Just to build on what Molly said, I think it's important for the UN Decade and all the programs and projects that have been endorsed to not try to recreate the wheel, and to build upon the programs that are already existing, such as SPC, or Pacific Community, PAC-IUS, PI-GOOS, and these are all ones in the Pacific, in the region that we work,
the Micronesian Conservation Trust. So whether it's nonprofits, ocean observing systems, even government agencies, there are a lot of people out there that have been working in this arena and trying to build those relationships and earn that trust and learn about the users and their needs. And I would encourage everyone to reach out to those programs first and not just try to go without that information in hand. And I would also just stress again the intent of being user-driven. And I think for me, this really starts with having a work plan and a budget. If you don't have staff, if you don't have resources, and if you don't have the time to do meaningful engagement, like Molly is talking about and others, it's just not going to happen. And it has to be genuine. And I really loved what Molly said about listening more than you talk and really going in and building those relationships, because that's truly what it's all about. And my last little plug is I want to also follow her lead and give a plug for the satellite event that's happening tomorrow that focuses on the user-driven process that I've mentioned for the Ocean Decade programs.
Thanks, Melissa. Thanks for pointing this out. Nadia?
Yes, thank you, George. In addition to what was very nicely said before me, I would now look at another technological issue that we need that will facilitate the user uptake and eventually the customization to user needs of our products, which is working seriously on a fully open and free data policy for all the new data products coming out of the decade, making it compulsory that all the data that comes out of the decade, both it is model data or observational data, will freely be available to all communities. And that I conclude in addition to having a very strong push toward getting also meteorological products together with oceanographic products. I know it's a bit of a technological issue, much more than we need to talk about, but I think my experience tells me that we are at the point where we need to strengthen that component. Thank you.
Thanks, Nadia. Thanks. Monica, do we have any questions from the audience before? I've got some more questions here.
George, it is, to be quite blunt, slow going, but I would have at least one question that would actually build on what you were discussing just now and just focusing on it a little bit more. I would like to start there with Melissa, because it has to do with reaching the end user, but in this time when it comes to actually send out warnings. Because Melissa, you mentioned warnings are often not an issue of the data at hand, but an issue of delivery. Now, we've already heard, how necessary it is to connect to the end user and to build trust. But perhaps we could sort of elaborate on what is the biggest challenge when it comes to delivering information to end users. What are the hurdles?
Thanks. I don't think I was the one that mentioned that, but it's a great point. I'll take the question.
Then it wasn't one of the notes that you sent beforehand. We knew about it.
Oh, maybe it was. Okay. No, I would. For us, one of the biggest challenges is in the Pacific, and this, I think we've experienced some of this already on this core event today, is the bandwidth issues. So lots of data, a lot of times data and forecasts and modeling take a larger bandwidth than some of our users have. So one of the ways that we try to overcome those challenges is by figuring out exactly what type of information is required from a model output or a different data stream, whatever it may be, and tailoring just that specific piece of data information to and getting that to the user. And oftentimes that's through an email or a text message rather than a fancy data portal or a website. So that's one of the things, and I'm sure there are others that have ideas too.
Well, thank you. A lot of you are nodding. I'm not sure if somebody wants to add something. If not, I have one more for Nadia, if that's okay with you, George. Because someone is interested, going by the experience that you have as an oceanographer, could you give us an example where ocean predictions had an actual, a tangible impact on society?
Yeah, well, many. We are using oil spill forecasting for big accidents. And at the moment, having predictions of where currents, how currents evolve on the time scales of several days, up to 10 days, we can run in different fashion, in different settings, where the oil will go. We had many accidents through IOC and WMO, forecasted, and the local community help to better focus the predictions and help the recovery. This is true in many countries, not all, but we should also facilitate this service at the international level as emergency response international service in support of everybody who needs. In the Mediterranean in particular, we have a very dedicated system run by European Copernicus system, and then using concerted actions by the nations around the basin. So we can actually show advantage of getting a real short-term prediction, knowing where the oil will reach the beach and how much oil.
Well, fantastic, fantastic. Thank you very much. George, those were the questions that I have for you, and I have bad news for you as well. Time is almost up, so I'm handing back to you now.
Thanks. I would like to ask Marjolaine one question. And you raised the issue of the unbalance in ocean observation in less developed countries and so on. And then earlier, when the session started, Wendy spoke about capacity sharing. Would that be a solution rather than capacity building?
Yes, certainly. I think that would be very useful. Also, a lot of these systems require very high computer resources, computers to run the models, or computer data knowledge, data science knowledge. So sharing that knowledge, but also sharing maybe access to computing platforms could be very valuable, I think, for countries which don't have those resources at hand.
Thanks, Marjolaine. So Monica, we are wrapping up, or?
Yes, unfortunately, time is out. So, but I would like to give you the opportunity to thank your panel and say goodbye to them.
Thanks a lot. Yes, I would like to thank all panelists. And although we just touched this very, very important issue, I think in this decade of ocean, we will see quite a lot of progress on the stakeholder engagement and on users. So thank you all. Monica.
Well, thank you. I would like to join the thanks. Again, of course, this is very short and sweet, and you can only scratch the surface. But again, you gave us a lot of food for thought. So thank you to all of you. Because this brings us almost to the end of this second Ocean Decade Laboratory. Almost, I say, because there is still a conclusion. But before I hand over to that, let me just point out that, of course, we will meet again in 48 hours, or actually less now, Friday at 8 p.m. Central European Time. We will see each other again for the wrap-up that includes a review of this core event, but also of all 31 satellite activities that are taking place till then. I certainly look forward to seeing you then on Friday. Thank you very much for having me. One of my big takeaways was the sentence, "It's an ocean world." A wonderful sentence. I'll keep that in my heart. And now let's find out what is the big takeaway and what happens next? And for that, I would like to hand over again to the two co-hosts, Craig and Detlef. Detlef, you're here with me in the studio. Your takeaway.
Okay, well, thank you very much. First of all, yes, we are getting now into what I would call the closing of the core event. It's not yet the conclusions, because the conclusions will rely really on the satellite events that now will start. I mean, once we actually finished here, maybe already the first satellite event started in parallel to our event here. Of course, we want to hear all the outcome of the satellite events, and only that can lead us into a conclusion, because we need these arguments and the information. And of course, we all will be busy now for the next 48 hours to listen to 31 or 32 satellite events, and I'm really looking forward to this. But sort of as a closing of this core event, and it's really kind of the kickoff for the next 48 hours, a couple of things I would like to start, and I would then actually like to pass over to my co-chair, Craig, afterwards. But first of all, we had a real technical glitch here in the beginning, and I'm glad that we actually still finish on time, because despite of this glitch. And thanks really for the technicians and everybody back in this room. You don't see them, I do see them, very busy people. But it reminds me that this is a live event, and of course we could claim we actually put in the glitch that you understand this is live and not pre-recorded. It's not true, but of course it would be a nice joke. So that as one thing, and of course we never explained to you, and you are the speakers, but you are also the audience. Why did we start in the hell at 8:00 p.m. in Northern Europe or in Europe? And the reason is really because this is a global event, and you have seen it by the speakers. We were around the world. We had speakers from India, from Hawaii, from Fiji, from Australia, including roosters. I really like that the roosters also, you would never have been able to be in a conference and hear roosters, so I really enjoyed this. But it's really that we started here at 8 p.m. Initially we wanted to start, in fact, at 10 p.m. to make sure that people from Fiji can join and listen to us. And so we still have to analyze who listened, but in fact we had more than 1,300 people registered. Experience would tell me that half of these people really were online, and we have to analyze this, as I said. So 800 people, 900 people, it's a good number, and I hope they actually are from around the world, because this is why we started at 8 p.m. and this was why we will start the closing at 8 p.m. as well, so that everybody can listen again. And so with this opening, Craig, I would really like to hear your thoughts. First of all, it was a really rich information, really delightful talks. And before I mention to you what I heard, I really would love to hear Craig's impression and takeaway messages that will lead us into the satellite sessions. Craig, over to you.
Thank you, Detlef, very much. And thanks to all the presenters and to Monica as well for helping us through this. Detlef, I must start, though, with a highlight to express my regard for the rather quick ability that you showed to step right in when we needed it, because we had that technical interruption. But we heard a lot of important and very relevant stories and expressions and experiences. And a few of the highlights I'd like to point out, which really reached the spirit of the decade. This is not science for the sake of science, although it's the learned notion of the science community identifying the thresholds and the necessary transitions that we need to break through for scientific understanding so that we could develop and deliver the products that the public needs. But I'll jump right back to one of the most recent sessions that we had where Molly Powers-Tora mentioned the point where maybe sometime we should be listening more than explaining what other people need. So that really brings into focus what was the route, the journey that we went on from the plenaries describing why are ocean observations and measurements important and really giving us that predicted ocean that we need and why we need it. And as we move through some of the other sessions, we were hearing the notions of, and it was consistent, co-design, co-development, working with the user and the talented, capable producers of that scientific understanding, but working the full spectrum from the observation and measurement to the scientific understanding of what it is we're measuring, the modelers that need to come in and develop the models that give us the forecasts and the future state, and then how do we socially, not necessarily scientifically, deliver that output. And hopefully we're delivering an output that the community we're serving needed to know. And my fear, and I think we touched on it somewhere in here, is that most people, and we're talking mostly about publicly funded science, most people don't realize that they are, in fact, the benefactor of this type of predicted ocean measurements. Our skill is pretty high. You heard that. Nadia reminded us of where the examples were where we had victory. I think in the very beginning, Wendy Watson-Wright's presentation showed us really where we have skill. And we do, but we need better skill, and we need to know better what the individual communities and regions of the world need. That's why it's the ocean science for sustainable development of the ocean, and it's why it's global. I was delighted to hear the references from several of our speakers to the elders and the traditional holders of land that we later in time might now be occupying or holding residence in, but to be acknowledging the populations that grew with the land and really have a cultural experience and in-depth knowledge of the millennia of experiences. That's a very important piece to include, and I'm so glad to hear that we have a mindfulness towards that. That's something that the decade is very much focused on, as is the decade focused on inclusiveness of all geographic regions. So the contributions of people who are in the Pacific, some of these nations that have a large ocean area but a small land area, are as equally as important as any others, as are their citizens, and the decade embraces that very well. We talked also, and we heard as well, about access to data. I think that's an important consideration. I'd like to push that even further. It's not just access to data, because I could tell you that if you happen to find me between the hours of 2 and 3 and make a phone call, maybe I can loosen up the data that I'm holding. I think what we need to do with the decade is even farther, is to require the deposit of data into a form and location where people can go and get it freely without having to go through the maker of that data. In other words, capture your data, process it, quality control, and then deposit it in the World Ocean Database so that people can come in and recover it rather than having to find the individual principal investigator. I think Beth Fulton's presentation, not to highlight one against any of the others, but Beth, in taking us on a tour of the biology, really brought to mind where we had mentioned earlier in, I think, Ariel's presentation and plenary and several others, we're mostly physical. We're dominating the physical in our ocean measurements. That's important for weather, no doubt. That's important for climate. But what does that climate impact on the marine environment, on the livelihoods of coastal residents and communities around the world? So the tour that we got through Beth in just a very brief amount of time that we gave her, she really took us from the macro to the micro, looking at viruses, bacteria, and whales, including the bacteria that might live in the stomach of the whale. It's the entirety of that biological ecosystem. Very important. Now, Detlef, let me throw back to you and ask you, since you're very much involved in G'day and in the chemistry of carbon throughout the ocean, much of your career has been punctuated by very, very positive and remarkable accomplishments in those areas. The chemistry, very important. The carbon, very important. How does the decade really wind up giving us the delivery from what you heard here today into the solutions that society needs? And whether it's physical or any other parameter. Over to you, please. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Craig. I think this was actually an excellent summary. And of course, it's very hard to summarize all this rich information in such a short time that we have available. And for anybody online, just the information, we will actually write a detailed outcome report and put this online, that in fact all this information can also be used downstream during the decade and also develop new actions and so forth. So with that said, first of all, I do agree with many of all your points you raised. I would come back to the co-design and the fact that we need to listen to, in fact, first of all, understand the questions and needs by the users, that we actually can tailor this. And I think this topic came up again and again, and also in the sense of that users don't want to have just our model output and sort of squeeze out their own information. We actually have to learn from them what they need, and we have to provide that. So in that sense, I think these kind of topics came up again and again. And Craig, I will come to your question. Before, I just want to highlight a few more points that I found extremely important. One is, in fact, we have to create trust. And this point came up in several occasions, that when we develop information and provide it to the users, we have to have this interaction, a two-way interaction with the users, and we have to develop trust, because people need to trust that our information is useful, and then of course we have a much better interaction and communication, or I mean, we become a joint group then with the users, because built on this trust. The other thing that I found extremely interesting is this ecosystem of ocean information, that it's not just one piece of information. We actually have a bunch of information, and we have to bring it together. Now, the question that you raised, in terms of carbon, but also in terms of physical parts, I think there is a lot of progress. We are not there yet. It's even on the decadal forecast. As Mojit said, there are limits, but we seem to actually see benefits. I mean, pushing the seasonal forecast forward, using the ocean information. It's actually the ocean information extremely important to develop this physical information forecast that might, in fact, extend our seasonal information up to the decadal information. Very useful also for fisheries and for many other parts. We seem to actually use this improved physical situation and forecast now, in fact, also to understand how the carbon uptake will come along. And I guess this is what you meant when you talk about the carbon and chemistry. Of course, we have a lot of chemistry here in the room and in the interaction and with the users. I don't think you mean this is really the chemistry in the ocean. And I think we can use this, and we need to use this. But also, I heard, first of all, I was really encouraged from what Katja said, that there's hope. That in fact we can use this also for the health of the ocean, for the chemistry in the ocean, for the pollutions in the ocean. But we are at the beginning, and we have to use the decay to expand this. But we heard also, and I found this a very important part that came out tonight, in terms of gaps, and we started with a question, where are the gaps? We are used to climate projections. They are very coarse, and as we heard from Fiji people, that's not good enough. So for me, there's a really gap along the coastlines. I mean, Nadia said it for the coastal ocean, but you can actually include the islands, the island state. The coasts are around many parts of the world, including islands, and I think this is where we really need to enhance the information on the small scales. It's the small scales, it's the local information that drives decision making, and I think this is where the decade really need to develop progress, including the observing system, but many more. I mean, basically, this is where the oil spill matters. This is where the pollutions matter. And I think this is where the model development comes in. This is where the observing capabilities, the improved observing capabilities come in. And so if coming back to your question, where are we already making progress? I think on the large scale, global to large scale, basin scale, I think we made a big progress. But in the sense of really the users sitting at the coastline requiring detailed information, this is where we need to make progress. And I think the decades, including the computer development, including the observing system development, the expansion of parameters that matter a lot in the coastal regions, biology, fisheries, oxygen, I'm pretty sure in terms of outcome of the decade, this is looking 10 years ahead, I think this is where we make really progress. And so maybe with this, back to you, Craig, we are coming actually now starting the satellite events, and it's your role now to, in fact, inform the online users, whoever is still online, what comes next? I mean, what's starting right now And how can everybody prepare to spend his time, her time, over the next 48 hours? Over to you, Craig.
Thank you very much, Detlef. And as we make our way into the satellite events, I just want to reach back into one element, and it's how you closed and how you concluded about where we will be 10 years from now. And I neglected to mention, but I need to mention, we deliberately constructed this session to include early career professionals inside of our formulation of this session and among the speakers. And I want to thank the early career professionals because, ladies and gentlemen, I'm 64 years old. I don't know where or if I will be 10 years from now. Hopefully, I'll be watching with pride. But this decade will belong to those early career professionals, and they will be in the seats that Detlef and I are holding now 10 years from now. So we're very grateful that the UN decade has really, with design, brought this forward, and I want to congratulate the early career professionals and encourage more participation. So now as we look at this, you do have an opportunity to see and hear from early career professionals and some of the traditional names and faces and people that are part of the community. We've got 33 of these satellite events. Some started when we started, so they've been ongoing. We have the Blue Planet Hackathon that's going on now, but you can look in this list here and see what's going on today from this point through tomorrow. And as hopefully you could see it online here, but then as we move into the second day, we have a continuation of these activities. And with the next slide, please, we can see, there we are, how we have all the way on through to the closing of our event. The diversity of these subjects are remarkable. They represent the remarkable breadth and diversity of the subjects that we have at hand here for the UN Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development. We talk about delivering a product to communities and constituents and the people who need this information. And I think you'll see this in some of the geographically focused areas, the Mediterranean and the Pacific and other areas. And you'll see it also by subject matter, whether it's ocean mapping or more carbon chemistry, biological monitoring. So this is a really a remarkable window for anyone who can dive in, and we encourage you to dive in. But we don't expect you to stay up for 48 hours, though tempting. You can also watch this afterwards, as these will be recorded and the offering will be made available. And I think that's the opportunity for us here. You can have it with the excitement of live broadcast, but then you can find your way to it in through the left side of the platform that you reached us on. Over in that left-hand margin, you can just click into the satellite events and join right up. So with that, I think we're coming into a close here, and I want to thank my co-chair and colleague, Detlef Stammer, for his very hard work and willingness to engage as such a wonderful partner here. And Detlef, I think maybe we can go on to a few more thank yous, and I'll put it back to you.
Well, thanks. Well, I actually should return whatever you said in nice words, and that of course includes yourself, and you should not forget yourself. And of course, this also includes myself. If it comes to 10 years ago, my hair is whiter than yours, so you are younger, I guess. But it's true, the next generation has to come in, and the decade will really be important for this. But moving forward, first of all, we will come to the closing session. This event has more than 30 satellite events, and it's actually the satellite events, it's kind of the spice in the soup. We cannot do these laboratories without satellite events. We cannot do the decades without the actions. And so to encourage you and your friends to already think forward, the next laboratories are lined up. They are shown on this slide: a productive ocean in February, a healthy and resilient ocean in March, a safe ocean in April, a transparent and accessible ocean in May 22. And of course, they all need satellite events. And so the call is open now. And this is really a message also from the government. If you want to join, please do it yourself, tell your friend. And so the proposals can come in now and should come in now, and people should prepare for this. But looking forward for our own laboratory, it is true, in 48 hours we meet again, and stay tuned, come back. This is really not finished yet. And we will try to actually come up with a summary then, a closing. It's not possible now. And with that, and please show the last slide. It is really back to the thank you that Craig already started. As I mentioned at the beginning, there was an expert team really putting this all together. We don't have the time to read all the names. You can read them yourself. It's really a rich panel, again, around the world. Some of these people were actually online today presenting talks or panel discussions. Really would like to mention two names in the sense of the early career science, Katie Geddes and Anne-Christine Zinker, who were really essential in preparing this and producing this. And this is what Craig already alluded to, the next generation. Thank you very much. And with this, it's my honor, Craig's honor, to really close this and lead into the satellite session. And with this, good night, good day.